After my open-heart surgery, my two children promised they would take turns staying with me. Day 1, no one showed up. Day 2, still nothing. By day 10, I was completely alone, listening to the beep of the machines while they were busy planning how to sell my house and declare me incompetent. They thought I was just a helpless old man who would quietly fade away. They forgot I spent 40 years engineering structures meant to withstand earthquakes. Dismantling their little scheme was going to be the easiest project of my life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Kofi Miller and I am 69 years old. When you wake up from a major cardiac bypass, the world does not come back to you all at once. It comes in fragments. First, the sharp burning agony splitting your chest right down the middle. Then the sterile chemical smell of the intensive care unit. Finally, the relentless rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor keeping time with your fragile pulse. But the one thing you expect to see when you finally force your heavy eyelids open is family. You expect to see the people you poured your entire life into sitting by your bedside, holding your hand, telling you the worst is over. Before they wheeled me into the operating room, my son Tyson and my daughter Latoya stood right next to my bed. They held my hands, their faces masks of perfect concern. Tyson, my successful structural engineer son, patted my shoulder and told me not to worry about a single thing. He said they had a spreadsheet worked out. He would take the morning shifts before heading to the construction site, and Latoya would take the evenings after closing her fashion boutique. They swore to me, looking me dead in the eyes, that I would not spend a single minute of my recovery alone. They promised I would be surrounded by family. But when the fog of anesthesia finally cleared and I opened my eyes, the cold plastic chair next to my bed was completely empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare on the bare walls. I tried to speak, to call out for someone, but my throat was parched and raw from the breathing tube. A nurse walked in, checked my vitals, and gave me a soft, sympathetic smile. But there were no familiar faces, just the steady, mocking beep of the heart monitor. I told myself it was just a scheduling mix-up. Tyson works for a massive commercial construction firm. He manages multi-million-dollar projects. Latoya runs a high-end boutique downtown dealing with demanding clients and inventory issues. They are busy people, important people. I raised them to be ambitious, to chase the American dream with everything they had. My late wife Yolanda and I worked tirelessly, sacrificing our own comforts to give them the head start we never had growing up. I reasoned with myself that they were just caught up in traffic or dealing with a sudden crisis at work. But as the sun set on that first day, turning the hospital room into a box of long, lonely shadows, the silence became deafening. Day 2 came and went. The physical pain in my chest was a constant blinding fire every time I took a breath. But honestly, it was nothing compared to the hollow, sinking feeling growing in the pit of my stomach. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the machine. Beep, beep. With every heartbeat, my mind drifted back through the years, tallying up the sacrifices Yolanda and I had made. I remembered writing the massive check for Tyson out of state college tuition, completely draining our emergency savings, so he would not graduate burdened by student loans. Beep. I remembered co-signing the commercial lease for Latoya Boutique, putting my own immaculate credit and financial security on the line just so her dream could become a reality. Beep. I remembered paying off Tyson gambling debts in secret so his wife would not find out and leave him. Beep. By day 4, the hospital staff started to notice you cannot hide abandonment in a place where people are trained to care. The nurses would come in to change my IV bags or check my surgical wounds, and their eyes would inevitably linger on the empty visitor chair in the corner. I could see the pity forming in their expressions, and my pride could not handle it. I found myself making elaborate excuses for my own grown children. Tyson is dealing with a massive site inspection this week, I told a young nurse named Rachel on day 5, forcing a weak chuckle. And Latoya has a terrible supply chain crisis at her store. They are just completely swamped with work, but they call me all the time. Nurse Rachel would just nod with that tight, polite smile. The kind of smile you give to a patient who is desperately lying to preserve his own dignity. I spent my days staring at the door, hoping it would open, and one of them would walk in holding a cup of coffee or a balloon, apologizing for the delay. But the door only ever opened for doctors, nurses, and the meal cart. A week passed, then 8 days, then 9. The excuses I spun for the hospital staff were running thin, but more importantly, the excuses I spun for myself had completely evaporated. I am a man of logic and mathematics. I spent my entire career looking at blueprints, calculating load-bearing capacities, and analyzing structural integrity. I knew how to look at a foundation and see if it was rotting from the inside out. My family foundation was rotting, and I had been willfully turning a blind eye to the cracks for years. The truth was bitter and hard to swallow. They did not care. As long as the checks cleared and the financial safety net was in place, I was useful. But sitting here weak, recovering, and in need of their time and care, I was nothing more than an inconvenience. On the morning of this 10th day, the sunlight filtered weakly through the hospital blinds, offering no warmth. Nurse Rachel walked into my room. This time, she did not have my usual morning medications on her tray. Instead, she was holding a glossy, brightly colored brochure. She hesitated for a moment by the door, looking down at the floor before stepping closer to my bed. She gently placed the pamphlet on my bedside table. I glanced at the cover. It was an information booklet for state-funded nursing homes and long-term assisted living facilities. I looked up at her, my heart dropping. She looked back at me, her eyes filled with a heartbreaking mixture of professional duty and genuine sorrow. "Mr. Miller," she asked softly, her voice trembling just a little bit, "do you actually have any family coming for you?" I looked at Nurse Rachel and felt a sharp sting of humiliation. I pushed the glossy pamphlet back across the rolling table. "I have 2 successful children," I told her, keeping my voice as steady as my recovering lungs allowed. "They are just dealing with professional emergencies. I will call them right now to sort out my discharge." She gave me a sad nod and stepped out of the room, leaving the pamphlet exactly where it was. My hands shook as I picked up my phone. I dialed Tyson first. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I hung up and called again. On the 3rd ring, he finally picked up. The background noise sounded completely quiet, not like a bustling commercial construction site with heavy machinery and yelling foremen. "Dad, I am swamped right now," Tyson answered, his tone clipped and impatient. "Is everything okay? I told you I would try to swing by this weekend." "Tyson," I replied, fighting the urge to beg my own son for his time. "It has been 10 days. I am supposed to be discharged soon. The hospital is asking for my care plan. You and Heather promised you would be here to help me transition back home." I heard a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "Dad, please do not do this right now. Do not make me feel guilty when I am busting my back to keep my job. We have a massive site inspection happening today. The safety auditors are breathing down my neck. Heather has been nagging me endlessly about our credit card bills, and if I leave this site and mess up this inspection, I could get fired. You know how the industry is. You want me to lose my job. Is that what you want?" The manipulation was incredibly smooth. He was turning my request for basic post-operative care into an attack on his livelihood. I closed my eyes and swallowed the bitter taste of betrayal. "No, son. I just expected you to keep your word. I will be there tomorrow, Pops. I promise. Just hang in there and let the nurses do their jobs." He hung up before I could say another word. I stared at the black screen of my phone. The rejection settled in my chest, a dull ache far worse than my surgical incisions. But I still had a daughter. I dialed LaToya. She answered almost immediately, but before I could even say hello, she launched into a theatrical tirade. "Dad, this is the worst possible time," she said, her voice rising in a pitch of practiced panic. "I am dealing with a complete supply chain crisis at the boutique. My overseas shipments are delayed. My inventory is completely messed up, and Bradley is stressing me out about our mortgage. He is useless right now, obsessed with closing some real estate deal, leaving me to handle these bankruptcy threats all by myself. I am literally having a panic attack right now." "LaToya," I said softly, "I am in the hospital. I just had my chest cracked open. I need my family." She groaned a sound of pure exasperation that cut straight to my soul. "Dad, you are in a hospital surrounded by medical professionals. I am out here trying to save my business from going under. Do you know how much money I am losing every single day? I cannot just drop everything and hold your hand. You are being completely unreasonable. Just wait one more day. Bradley and I will come see you tomorrow evening. I promise." She ended the call. I placed the phone on the bedside table. 10 days. 10 days of excuses. 10 days of tomorrow. I listened to them weaponize their daily stress to invalidate my life-threatening surgery. They were gaslighting me, making me feel like a selfish burden for expecting them to honor a simple promise. They spoke to me not as a father who had sacrificed everything for their success, but as a nuisance distracting them from their highly important lives. I thought about all the times I had dropped everything for them. When Tyson wrecked his first car, I was at the police station at 2 in the morning. When LaToya broke her arm at cheer camp, I left a critical engineering review just to sit by her hospital bed. I never once told them I was too busy. I never once made them feel like they were interrupting my life, because they were my life. but to them my recovery was just a tedious obligation they were actively trying to dodge. An hour later, the hospital social worker walked into my room with a clipboard. She introduced herself as Ms. Higgins and took a seat in the empty chair where my children should have been sitting. "Mr. Miller," she began with a clinical but polite tone, "we need to discuss your discharge. The medical team says you are physically cleared to leave, but we have a problem with your file." "What kind of problem?" I asked. "We do not have a power of attorney on record for you," she explained, adjusting her glasses. "Because of your age and the severity of your surgery, we usually require a designated family member to sign off on your home care plan. Since no one has come to claim responsibility, protocol requires us to evaluate your competency to live independently. If we cannot verify a safe home environment, the state might mandate a temporary transition into an assisted living facility." She tapped the glossy nursing home pamphlet Nurse Rachel had left behind. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Because my children had abandoned me, the hospital system was preparing to strip away my autonomy. If they designated me incompetent, the state could theoretically assign a legal guardian. A complete stranger would have access to my house, my accounts, my life. My children had left me entirely exposed to the bureaucratic machine. They had essentially thrown me to the wolves. They looked at my modest medical chart and saw a vulnerability that needed to be managed. What neither Ms. Higgins nor my two ungrateful children understood was the mind they were dealing with. I am not just a retired old man living on a meager pension. I spent 35 years as a senior structural engineer. I designed the complex load-bearing frameworks for some of the most iconic commercial high-rises in the country. More importantly, I hold 4 highly lucrative patents for seismic reinforcement materials. My children think my wealth consists only of my paid-off house and a basic retirement account. They have absolutely no idea about the massive royalty checks that clear into my private holding accounts every single quarter. They drastically underestimated my intellect, and they severely underestimated my resources. I looked Ms. Higgins dead in the eye and sat up straight, completely ignoring the sharp pull of my chest stitches. "I do not need a power of attorney," I told her with a voice that carried decades of absolute boardroom authority. "I am completely competent. I will sign my own discharge papers right now. Provide me the liability waiver, and I will take full legal responsibility for my departure." She blinked clearly, taken aback by my sudden shift in demeanor. She tried to protest mildly, citing hospital policy, but I firmly demanded the forms. 10 minutes later, I signed the discharge documents in a steady, flawless script. I changed into my street clothes, slowly making sure every movement was deliberate and focused. I did not call Tyson. I did not call LaToya. I packed my small overnight bag, walked out of the sliding hospital doors, and ordered an Uber in absolute silence. As the car pulled up to the curb, a cold, calculating calm washed over my entire body. I gave the driver my home address. I was going to surprise my children. I was going to see exactly how busy they truly were. The gray sedan smelled faintly of stale vanilla air freshener and old coffee. I slid into the back seat, moving with extreme caution to protect my freshly wired sternum. Every single bump in the asphalt, every slight tap of the brakes, sent a blinding shockwave of agony straight through my chest. The doctors had cracked my ribcage open just 10 days ago to bypass the failing arteries around my heart. The physical pain was sharp, relentless, and completely exhausting, forcing me to take shallow, measured breaths just to keep from crying out. Yet strangely, the intense physical discomfort served as a grounding force. It sharpened my mind and burned away the lingering anesthesia of paternal denial. For the first time in over a week, the heavy, suffocating fog of making excuses for my children was completely gone. The illusion of my loving, devoted family had been surgically removed, leaving behind a cold, sterile, and absolute clarity. I looked out the passenger window, watching the city blur past, and my thoughts naturally drifted to my late wife. My beautiful, fiercely intelligent Yolanda. She was a forensic accountant by trade, a woman who understood the complex language of numbers and human nature better than anyone I have ever known. Decades ago, when my first major patent for seismic reinforcement materials was acquired by an international development firm, the financial payout was staggering. It was generational wealth, the kind of money that fundamentally alters a family bloodline. But Yolanda and I made a strict pact that very night, sitting at our scuffed kitchen table drinking cheap coffee. We decided right then and there that we would not change our lifestyle. We did not upgrade to a sprawling mansion in some exclusive gated community. We did not buy imported sports cars or drape ourselves in flashy designer clothes. We stayed in our comfortable, sturdy 4-bedroom colonial house. We wanted Tyson and LaToya to understand the profound value of a hard-earned dollar. We wanted them to hustle to build their own empires and to know the deep pride of self-reliance. To manage our new reality, we created a private holding company, named it Yolanda Incorporated, and buried our massive wealth behind thick layers of legal and corporate protection. We genuinely thought we were keeping our children grounded. We thought we were building their character and protecting them from the toxic entitlement that ruins so many wealthy families. Instead, we inadvertently bred a completely different kind of arrogance. Because Tyson and LaToya saw us living a seemingly standard middle-class life, they assumed our financial capacity was strictly limited to my basic engineering pension and a decent savings account. They viewed us as an emergency fund they could occasionally tap into, completely oblivious to the vast financial empire operating silently in the background. They severely underestimated our resources, and more importantly, they severely underestimated me. The Uber exited the highway and merged onto the familiar winding roads of my neighborhood. This is a classic American suburb defined by perfectly manicured lawns, mature oak trees, and quiet, predictable routines. I have driven down these streets thousands of times over the last 30 years. I know every sharp curve, every hidden stop sign, and every neighbor meticulously painted mailbox. I can hear the faint ticking of automatic sprinklers watering the grass and see kids riding their bicycles on the wide sidewalks. But today, looking through the tinted window of a stranger car, this entire world feels completely alien and distinctly hollow. As a structural engineer, I cannot help but look at the physical world in terms of load-bearing walls, foundational integrity, and stress distribution. I look at the beautiful, pristine two-story houses we pass, and I wonder how many of them are actually rotting from the inside out. I wonder how many of these perfect suburban facades hide broken families, selfish children, and forgotten parents. For 3 decades, my house was my ultimate sanctuary. I planted the birch tree in the front yard the very same week Tyson took his first shaky steps. I poured the concrete for the expanded driveway so LaToya and her teenage friends would have a safe place to park their cars. I personally designed the heavy oak front door to be a formidable barrier against the harsh world outside, a clear boundary that protected the love and warmth inside. I had always imagined that coming home from a major life-threatening surgery would be a triumphant, heartwarming event. I pictured myself opening that heavy oak door to the smell of Yolanda-famous roasted chicken. I imagined Tyson standing in the hallway ready to take my bags and LaToya rushing forward to give me a gentle, careful hug, avoiding my stitches. I had spent 10 miserable days in a sterile hospital bed, desperately clinging to the hope that I would eventually return to a home filled with family and love. But as the car glides down my familiar street, I am actively mentally preparing myself for the exact opposite reality. I am bracing myself for the cold, echoing silence of a completely empty house. I am calculating the physical mechanics of how I will manage to carry my own overnight bag up the front steps without tearing my chest muscles. I am planning how I will make my own meals, manage my own strict pain medication schedule, and navigate my difficult recovery entirely alone. The driver slows down, tapping his brakes and double-checking the navigation app mounted on his dashboard. We are approaching my property line. I lean forward slightly in my seat, gritting my teeth and ignoring the sudden, sharp protest of my healing chest. I peer through the windshield, completely ready to face the empty driveway and the quiet isolation that I know awaits me. But the driveway is not empty. The driver pulls up to the curb and shifts the car into park. I sit totally frozen in the back seat, my hands gripping the leather upholstery, my eyes locked on the scene directly in front of me. Parked right there on the concrete I poured with my own 2 hands is Tyson pristine custom black SUV gleaming in the afternoon sun. Sitting directly behind it, blocking the path to the garage, is LaToya's sleek silver luxury Mercedes. They are not at a commercial construction site miles away managing heavy machinery and safety auditors. They are not frantically running a downtown boutique battling an international supply chain crisis. They did not skip my hospital discharge because they were fighting to save their demanding careers. They are right here. I handed the Uber driver a $20 bill and asked him to keep the change. I waited until his taillights disappeared around the corner before I took my first step onto the pavement. My legs felt like lead, and the thick surgical dressing under my shirt chafed aggressively against my raw skin. I did not march up the wide concrete driveway to the heavy oak front door. My instincts, honed by decades of anticipating structural failures, screamed at me to assess the situation before making my presence known. I needed to see exactly what kind of emergency was keeping my children away from my hospital bed. The faint sound of rhythmic bass thumped through the warm afternoon air. It was music. Someone was playing upbeat music in my backyard. As I hobbled closer to the property line, the unmistakable rich aroma of marinated ribs sizzling over hot charcoal hit my senses. They were not just home skipping work, they were throwing a barbecue. A backyard feast while their father lay in a sterile hospital room waiting for them to show up. I walked toward the side of the house, dragging my feet through the soft grass to mask the sound of my approach. I approached the tall cedar fence securing the side gate. I built this fence 15 years ago, reinforcing the hinges with industrial-grade steel. I knew exactly how to lift the latch so the metal would not squeak. I slipped into the narrow walkway between the side of my house and the tall privacy hedges Yolanda had planted. The shadows offered me complete concealment. I pressed my back against the warm brick of my own home, catching my breath. My heart pounded furiously against my newly repaired arteries, a dangerous, erratic rhythm that forced me to close my eyes and focus on staying upright. I took slow, shallow breaths, clutching my chest. When the sharp, stabbing pain subsided into a manageable, dull ache, I crept toward the edge of the brick wall where the house opened up to the backyard patio. I peeked around the corner. The patio was bathed in golden sunlight. Tyson was standing by my custom-built grill, holding a frosty bottle of imported beer in one hand and a pair of stainless steel tongs in the other. He wore a crisp linen shirt and expensive designer sunglasses, looking perfectly relaxed. LaToya was lounging on the padded patio furniture, holding a crystal glass filled with chilled white wine. She was laughing loudly, tossing her head back without a single care in the world. Sitting across from her was Tyson's wife Heather, scrolling idly on her smartphone. And standing right by the sliding glass doors was Bradley, my white son-in-law, the aggressive commercial real estate broker who always looked at my property like it was a glowing dollar sign. I remained frozen in the shadows, completely hidden by the dense foliage of the overgrown bushes. I did not move a single muscle. I just stood there and listened as the people I loved most in this world casually dismantled my life. Bradley swirled the ice in his whiskey glass and leaned against the brick exterior of my house. He surveyed the expansive backyard, the mature oak trees, and the newly renovated deck with a predatory grin. "I am telling you guys," he said, his voice carrying easily over the soft music. "The old man will not last long." The doctors literally cracked his chest open. Even if he survives the recovery, his quality of life is going to plummet. I have already pulled the comps on this lot. The market value in this specific zip code has skyrocketed over the last 6 months. We could list this property as is and start a massive bidding war by next weekend. I held my breath, bracing myself for Tyson or LaToya to shut him down. I waited for my son to defend my honor. I waited for my daughter to express horror at her husband's callous greed. Instead, Tyson simply flipped a rack of ribs on the grill and took a casual sip of his beer. "We have to be smart about it," Tyson replied, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "We cannot just sell it out from under him while he is coherent. That is why the nursing home transition is critical. The state will require liquidation of his physical assets to cover the long-term facility care anyway. We secure the medical power of attorney, declare him mentally and physically unfit for independent living, and take over the estate management. It is the most logical step. It is for his own good." Heather finally looked up from her phone, rolling her eyes. "Well, we need to hurry up," she complained, adjusting her expensive sunglasses. "I am completely exhausted from pretending to care. Do you have any idea how much anxiety I get just thinking about having to change his bandages or deal with his medication schedules? I did not sign up to be a hospice nurse for your father, Tyson. We have our own lives. We have vacations planned. If he comes back here, he is going to drag us down with his constant needs." LaToya took a long gulp of her wine and nodded in enthusiastic agreement. "Heather is right," she said, swirling the remaining liquid in her glass. "I literally had to silence my phone today because the hospital kept calling me about his discharge plan. It is so annoying. They keep asking when we are coming to pick him up. I told them I was trapped in a supplier meeting. I cannot deal with the emotional guilt trip today. I need this barbecue to decompress. Bradley has a contact at the Oakwood Assisted Living Center. They have a bed opening up next week. We just need to convince the hospital doctors that he is exhibiting signs of severe dementia. Once they put that in his medical file, the state takes over the transition." Bradley chuckled, a sharp, grating sound that made my blood run absolutely cold. "Convincing them he is losing his mind will be the easiest part," he said. "The guy is almost 70. He just went through major trauma. We just tell the social workers he has been acting erratic, misplacing things, and forgetting basic conversations. With his physical state, they will rubber stamp the guardianship petition in a matter of days. Then I handle the real estate listing, and we split the equity 4 ways, clean, fast, and profitable. I stood in the shadows, pressing my hand hard against my aching chest. My heart rate monitor would have been screaming if I were still hooked up to the hospital machines. The sheer magnitude of their betrayal was staggering. They were not just ignoring my recovery. They were actively orchestrating my demise. They were throwing a party to celebrate my impending institutionalization. They were dividing up the equity of my home while I was supposedly lying helpless in a hospital bed. They wanted to strip me of my dignity, my freedom, and my home, just so they could avoid the inconvenience of caring for me and line their pockets with my hard-earned money. They looked at my home, the house where Yolanda and I had celebrated their birthdays, and wiped away their tears and saw nothing but a lucrative real estate transaction. A heavy, suffocating darkness settled over my spirit, but it was immediately replaced by a razor-sharp, icy resolve. I did not want to confront them right now. I did not want to stand in the middle of my backyard, weak and trembling, arguing with thieves and liars over a plate of barbecue ribs. I needed to gather my strength. I needed to retreat into the safety of my own walls and formulate a precise structural plan to demolish their arrogant conspiracy. While they were laughing and pouring another round of drinks, I silently slipped away from the hedges. I moved toward the back door of the laundry room, which I knew Tyson always left unlocked when he was grilling. I turned the brass knob millimeter by millimeter and slipped inside my own house like a ghost. The air conditioning washed over me, a stark contrast to the heat outside. I navigated the familiar hallway, avoiding the floorboards I knew would creak. I made my way down the corridor toward my master bedroom. I desperately needed to sit down on my own mattress to take my pain medication and let my exhausted body rest before I figured out my next move. I reached for the handle of my bedroom door and pushed it open. I stopped dead in my tracks. My sturdy oak bed frame was completely stripped of its sheets and blankets. The framed photographs of Yolanda that had sat on my nightstand for a decade were gone. My closet doors were wide open and my clothes were missing from the hangers. Instead, the entire room was filled with brown cardboard moving boxes stacked nearly to the ceiling. Thick black markers scrawled across the side of the nearest box read, "Master Bedroom Donations." They had not just planned to send me away. They had already started packing up my entire life. I stood in the doorway of my own master bedroom and stared at the cardboard towers that had replaced my life. The words "Master Bedroom Donations" scrawled in thick black marker felt like a physical blow to my freshly wired sternum. I stepped inside and pushed the door shut behind me until it clicked perfectly into the frame. The silence in the room was absolute, a stark contrast to the thumping bass and laughter echoing from the backyard patio. I moved toward the closest box, ignoring the searing pain in my chest. I peeled back the poorly taped flaps. Inside, shoved together without an ounce of care, were my custom-tailored suits, my pristine leather dress shoes, and the framed certificates of my engineering patents. They had not packed my belongings with the reverence of children securing their father's legacy. They had hastily shoved my existence into cardboard squares like a janitor clearing out a fired employee's cubicle. I walked over to the adjacent stack. These boxes were marked for the local landfill. I opened the top one and my breath hitched. Resting on top of a pile of old sweaters was Yolanda's favorite wooden jewelry box. It was empty, of course. Heather or LaToya had undoubtedly already scavenged the pearls and gold chains. But the box itself, the hand-carved mahogany chest I bought for her on our 5th anniversary in New Orleans, had been tossed into the garbage pile. They did not see the memories. They only saw clutter standing in the way of their real estate transaction. The sheer audacity of it all was staggering. They had not even waited for the hospital to officially discharge me. They had spent the last 10 days complaining about how busy they were, weaponizing their careers to avoid visiting me while simultaneously gutting my sanctuary. I turned my attention to my heavy oak desk in the corner of the room. It was the desk where I had drafted my most lucrative patents. The drawers were pulled out and completely empty. My financial ledgers, my old tax returns, my property deeds, everything had been stripped. But as my eyes scanned the floor, I noticed my stainless steel wastebasket tucked halfway under the desk. It was overflowing with crumpled papers, shredded envelopes, and discarded manila folders. Tyson and LaToya had always been arrogant, but arrogance breeds incredible sloppiness. When you believe you are the smartest person in the room, you stop covering your tracks. I lowered myself into my heavy leather desk chair, wincing as my back made contact with the upholstery. I reached down and pulled the wastebasket into my lap. As an engineer, I spent decades predicting failure points. A structural collapse never happens without warning. There are always micro-fractures, stress lines, and compromised materials that tell the story long before the building falls. Sitting in my dismantled bedroom, I realized I was looking at the blueprints of my own family's moral collapse. I dug my hands into the trash bin, pulling out the crumpled wads of paper. I flattened them out on the smooth surface of my desk, one by one, smoothing the deep creases with the palm of my hand. The first few pages were ruined drafts of real estate listings. Bradley had clearly been running comparative market analyses on my property, calculating the exact dollar amount they could squeeze out of this lot. But beneath the real estate printouts, I found a staple-bound stack of legal documents printed on heavy, expensive, watermarked paper. I smoothed out the cover page and felt a cold, sharp spike of adrenaline pierce my veins. The bold, capitalized letters at the top of the page read, "Petition for the appointment of a guardian." Right beneath that, in the section detailing the proposed ward of the state, was my full legal name, Kofi James Miller. I flipped to the second page. The petitioners listed were Tyson Miller and Latoya Miller Grant. I read through the legal jargon, my eyes scanning the fabricated narrative they had constructed with their expensive lawyers. The petition cited advanced dementia, severe cognitive decline, and a complete inability to manage financial and personal affairs. They had drafted a compelling, entirely fictional story about how my recent open-heart surgery had accelerated a rapid mental deterioration. They claimed I was a danger to myself. They claimed I was wandering the house at night, forgetting my own name and failing to understand basic financial concepts. The sheer magnitude of the lie was breathtaking. They were not just trying to put me in a cheap nursing home. They were petitioning the court to legally strip me of my human rights. If a judge approved this document, I would lose the right to sign my own checks, vote, manage my own medical care, or decide where I lived. I would become a legal ghost, entirely subjected to the whims of the very people who had abandoned me in an intensive care unit. Attached to the back of the petition was a printed email thread between Bradley and a lawyer. I read Bradley's message. "We need this expedited. The old man is being discharged soon, and if he gets back to the house and starts checking his accounts, he might try to transfer assets. We have a doctor lined up who is willing to sign the medical competency evaluation by Friday. Just get the court filing ready." They had bought a doctor. They were going to bring a corrupt medical professional into my home to rubber stamp my mental decline. The precision of their malice was terrifying, but their execution was dangerously flawed. They had left the drafts in my own bedroom trash. They assumed I would never return to this house as a free-thinking man. They assumed they had already won. I folded the petition and slipped it into the inside pocket of my jacket. This was no longer just a family dispute over a house. This was a hostile corporate takeover of my life. I needed to pivot my strategy immediately. I could not confront them now. If I walked out to that patio and revealed I knew their plan, they would simply accelerate the legal timeline. I had to play their game, step into the role they had written for me, and quietly rig the entire stage with explosives. Suddenly, the silence in the bedroom was broken by the sharp, jarring vibration of my cell phone in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the bright screen. It was Tyson. I stood up slowly, managing my pain, and walked over to the bedroom window. I parted the heavy wooden blinds just a fraction of an inch, creating a tiny line of sight into the backyard. Tyson was standing near the barbecue grill, a cold bottle of beer in his left hand, laughing at something Bradley had just said. He was holding his cell phone to his ear with his right hand. I pressed the accept button and lifted the phone to my ear. "Hey, Pops," Tyson said, his voice dripping with fake, breathless exhaustion. "I am so sorry I could not make it to the hospital today. This site inspection is absolutely killing me. I have been running around in the dirt for 10 hours straight." I watched him through the blinds. He took a relaxed sip of his beer, not a single drop of sweat on his crisp linen shirt. He smiled broadly at his wife across the patio. "Take your time, son," I replied, my voice steady, cold, and perfectly calm. "I am exactly where I need to be." I pressed the end call button and placed the phone face down on the smooth mahogany surface of my desk. Outside my window, the barbecue continued. Tyson laughed at something Heather said, completely unaware that the man he thought he was outsmarting had just begun the demolition of his entire life. I took a slow, deliberate breath to manage the throbbing ache in my sternum. I needed to operate with absolute precision. I reached under the bottom drawer of my heavy oak desk. My children had likely scoured this room looking for basic bank statements and standard retirement accounts, but they lacked the engineering mindset to look for false bottoms and hidden load-bearing compartments. I pressed a concealed latch and a secret panel dropped open, revealing a secure encrypted smartphone and a heavy leather-bound ledger. I did not keep the real numbers on standard hard drives or in filing cabinets. I kept them locked down tighter than a Federal Reserve. I powered on the device and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice before a sharp professional voice answered. "Kofi," she said, her tone shifting immediately from corporate defense attorney to genuine concern. "I thought you were still recovering in the cardiac ward. Why are you calling me from the secure line?" Vanessa Wright is not just a lawyer, she is a legal architect. When my first seismic reinforcement patent revolutionized commercial skyscraper construction 15 years ago, I knew I needed someone who could build an impenetrable fortress around my sudden wealth. Vanessa helped me create Yolanda Incorporated. She managed the relentless stream of royalty checks, negotiated international licensing deals, and ensured my true identity remained completely shielded from the public and my children. She is ruthless, meticulous, and fiercely loyal to me and to the memory of my late wife. "I am home, Vanessa," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "And I have a situation that requires immediate structural intervention." I spent the next 20 minutes giving her a precise clinical breakdown of everything I had discovered since leaving the hospital. I told her about the empty hospital chair, the gaslighting phone calls, the backyard barbecue celebrating my impending institutionalization, and the drafted petition for guardianship I had just pulled out of my own wastebasket. I read her the specific legal statutes they had cited and detailed their plan to bribe a medical professional to declare me legally incompetent. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy and dangerous. When Vanessa finally spoke, her voice was absolute ice. "They are trying to declare you legally incompetent," she repeated, the words dripping with pure disgust. "The man who engineered the foundational support for the new downtown financial center. The man who holds 4 global patents for structural integrity. They think you are just a senile old pensioner they can shove into a state-funded facility and strip for parts. They only see what I allowed them to see." "Vanessa," I explained, leaning back slightly in my chair. "Yolanda and I wanted them to be hungry. We wanted them to build their own empires and learn the value of hard work. We kept the Yolanda Incorporated assets completely compartmentalized. They think my net worth is entirely tied up in the equity of this house and a standard engineering pension. They are acting out of pure, arrogant greed. They see a vulnerability, and they are moving in to exploit it." "Then we crush them, Kofi," she stated flatly. "Tell me exactly what you want to do. We can file an immediate injunction against this guardianship petition. I can have my private security team at your front door in 10 minutes to physically remove them from your property for trespassing. We can shut this down today." "No," I said, taking a slow, shallow breath. "If we show our hand right now, they will panic and retreat. They will hire crisis managers and spin a narrative that they were just concerned children making a misguided medical mistake. I do not want them to retreat. I want them to commit." A building does not collapse impressively if you only take out one pillar. You have to systematically weaken the entire foundation, so when it falls, the destruction is absolute and irreversible. I opened the heavy leather ledger on my desk. "Let us review the active safety nets we have in place for them. I want to start freezing the structural supports today." Vanessa pulled up the corporate files on her end. I could hear her rapid keystrokes echoing over the secure line. "All right, let us start with Tyson. He thinks he is a self-made hotshot project manager at Apex Commercial Construction. He struts around acting like he built that firm from the ground up. He has absolutely no idea that Yolanda Incorporated holds the primary commercial debt for Apex. We effectively own their operational line of credit. Furthermore, we are the silent guarantors for the massive surety bonds on his current development projects. Pull the guarantee, I instructed, without a single ounce of hesitation. Initiate the process to call in the commercial debt. I want his firm to feel a sudden, massive financial squeeze by the end of the week. When the executives at Apex realize their funding is miraculously drying up, they will immediately look for the weakest link on their payroll to cut costs. Tyson has been blowing off his job to stand in my backyard and plan my demise. Let him experience the brutal professional consequences of his absence." "Done," Vanessa said, her keystrokes flying across her keyboard. "And what about LaToya? Her high-end fashion boutique is currently leasing a prime retail storefront in the Arts District. She loves to post online about being an independent business owner. Yolanda Incorporated owns that entire commercial block," I reminded her. "LaToya has been short on her lease payments for the last 3 months. She constantly cries about supply chain issues, but she just bought a new luxury car. I have been quietly authorizing the property management company to forgive the late fees and ignore the delinquency to keep her business afloat. Stop the forgiveness protocol entirely. I will instruct the property managers to issue a formal notice of default," Vanessa confirmed. "She will be legally required to produce the back rent immediately or face complete eviction and total asset seizure. Her inventory will be locked down by Monday. And the personal emergency accounts I asked, referencing the joint checking and credit accounts I used to quietly bail them out of their personal blunders. I am freezing all secondary cards and cutting off the overdraft protection right now, she replied. The well is completely dry, Kofi. If they try to swipe those cards to fund their little scheme, they are going to hit a brick wall. I looked through the wooden blinds one more time. Bradley was aggressively pointing at my property line, outlining his grand vision for the real estate listing. Heather was laughing, tossing her expensive hair, completely unbothered by the fact that she was standing on stolen ground, plotting against a man who had treated her like a daughter. They were completely intoxicated by their own perceived brilliance. They thought they were the apex predators circling a wounded animal. They did not realize they had just wandered blindfolded into a meticulously designed trap. I will stay here in the house, I told Vanessa. I will play the exact role they have written for me. I will be the tired, confused old man. I will let them bring their corrupt doctor into my home. I will let them draft their fraudulent real estate documents and hand me the pen. I will give them every single piece of rope they need to hang themselves legally, professionally, and financially. The sound of Vanessa printing documents echoed through the phone line. She had moved seamlessly into full corporate warfare mode. Do you want me to serve them eviction and debt collection notices now? Vanessa asked. No, I replied. Let them dig the hole deeper first. I spent the next 48 hours perfecting the architecture of my own apparent decline. I stopped shaving my face. I wore an oversized faded gray bathrobe that made my shoulders look hollow and frail. I shuffled my feet across the hardwood floors, allowing my slippers to drag with the heavy, unpredictable rhythm of a man losing his grip on reality. When the doorbell rang on Thursday afternoon, I did not walk to the entryway. I limped. I peered through the frosted glass pane and saw Heather standing on my front porch. My white daughter-in-law was wearing a tailored beige trench coat, a silk scarf, and gripping a cheap plastic container of grocery store soup in her manicured hands. I unlocked the heavy deadbolt and pulled the door open, leaving the security chain attached for a brief moment as if I could not figure out how to slide it free. Heather sighed loudly, a sharp hissing sound of pure impatience before I finally fumbled the chain loose. Hi, Kofi, she said, pushing past me without waiting for an invitation. She did not offer a hug. She did not ask about the surgical incisions running down the center of my chest. Instead, she immediately wrinkled her nose, raising a hand to her face, as if the very air inside my home was offensive to her. It is so stuffy in here. Have you even opened a window? It smells like a hospital. I closed the door slowly, leaning heavily against the wall. I am just tired, Heather, I mumbled, pitching my voice an octave higher and introducing a slight tremble. The medicine makes me so sleepy. She placed the lukewarm container of soup on the pristine marble counter of my kitchen. Tyson asked me to drop this off. We are incredibly busy, but we cannot just let you starve now, can we? She turned around and surveyed my kitchen, her sharp blue eyes scanning the expensive appliances, the granite countertops, and the custom cabinetry Yolanda and I had installed 10 years ago. She looked at my home the same way a vulture examines a carcass, trying to determine which piece has the most meat. You know, Kofi, it is really too much house for one person, she said, running a finger along the edge of the kitchen island to check for dust. You should not be navigating these stairs with your heart condition. Tyson and I were talking, and we really think it is time for you to consider a more manageable environment, someplace with 24-hour supervision. You are becoming a massive liability to yourself. I stared at her, letting my jaw hang slightly slack. This woman was standing in the very house I had remortgaged to pay for her extravagant destination wedding in Napa Valley. I paid for the designer dress she wore down the aisle. I paid for the imported champagne her friends drank. And now she was standing in my kitchen calling me a liability. I just want to stay in my home, I said, forcing a slight pleading whine into my tone. Heather rolled her eyes, crossing her arms over her expensive coat. Well, we do not always get what we want. Tyson is pulling his hair out trying to manage your medical bills. We are carrying a massive financial burden right now, which actually brings me to why I came over. She walked purposefully out of the kitchen and headed straight down the hallway toward my private study. I followed her, shuffling my slippers against the floorboards, maintaining the facade of a confused, fragile old man. By the time I reached the doorway of the study, Heather was already on her knees, pushing aside the Persian rug that covered the center of the room. She stared down at the heavy steel plate of my floor safe. Tyson said you keep your important insurance documents in here, she said, looking up at me with a completely fabricated smile. The hospital has been hounding us for the supplemental insurance policy numbers. We need to get this sorted out today so they stop harassing Tyson at work. Just give me the combination and I will grab the files for you. It will take 2 seconds. I looked at her kneeling on my floor, her greedy eyes fixed on the steel dial. Tyson did not need insurance documents. The hospital already had my primary and supplemental insurance cards on file. They were trying to access the safe to look for the deed to the house stock certificates or stacks of emergency cash. They wanted to liquidate whatever physical assets I had hidden away before the state-appointed guardianship took effect. I stood in the doorway and blinked slowly, raising a trembling hand to massage my forehead. The safe, I muttered, acting as if the very word confused me. Yolanda usually opens the safe. Heather let out a sharp, exasperated breath. Yolanda has been dead for 5 years, Kofi. You need to focus. What are the numbers? I stepped closer, rubbing my chin. 4, I said slowly. Then a long, agonizing pause. 7. Another long pause. 2. Heather rapidly punched the numbers into the electronic keypad. 472, she repeated, her voice tight with anticipation. What are the last 3 digits? I stared blankly at the wall. Was it Yolanda's birthday? No, maybe it was the address of our old apartment in Chicago. I tapped the side of my head, acting deeply distressed. I am sorry, Heather. My mind is just so foggy today. The doctor said the anesthesia might cause some memory loss. I think the next number is a 9. She slammed her finger against the 9 key, and then she snapped her mask of fake compassion, slipping entirely. 1 I offered unhelpfully, and maybe a 6. She punched in the final digits. The keypad beeped a harsh, flat tone and flashed a bright red light. Error. She tried it again, pressing the keys harder. 472916. The red light flashed again. Kofi, this is completely ridiculous, she hissed, slamming her palm against the steel door of the safe. You are locking us out of vital documents because your brain is rotting. Think. Try to remember something useful for once. I took a step back, shrinking away from her, feigning absolute terror. I do not remember, I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. I am so tired. Heather stood up violently, brushing the dust off the knees of her tailored pants. She glared at me with absolute, unmasked disgust. You are an unbelievable burden, she sneered, grabbing her designer purse from the desk. Tyson was right. You belong in a facility. I am not wasting another minute in this filthy house. I will let him deal with you. She stormed out of the study, her high heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floors. The front door slammed shut a few seconds later, shaking the picture frames on the walls. I stood perfectly still, listening to the aggressive roar of her luxury car engine starting up in the driveway. I waited until the sound of her tires faded completely down the street. The moment she was gone, my shoulders dropped their slumped posture. I stood up straight, rolling my neck and taking a deep, steadying breath. My mind was sharp and the performance was over. I walked calmly over to the Persian rug and kicked it back over the floor safe with the toe of my slipper. As I walked back toward the kitchen, my secure smartphone vibrated heavily in the pocket of my bathrobe. I pulled it out and looked at the glowing screen. It was an automated fraud alert triggered by Vanessa legal team. The notification was crystal clear. Transaction declined. $15,000 attempted at Romanov luxury timepieces. Cardholder Heather Miller. She had left my house furious that she could not crack my safe and immediately drove to a high-end jewelry store to buy a Rolex on the joint credit card she assumed I was too senile to monitor. She thought she could swipe the plastic and steal my money while I was supposedly losing my mind. I stared at the screen, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. I pressed my thumb against the screen, selecting the glowing red option that read, Decline and Report Fraud. The very next morning, exactly at 9 o'clock, the doorbell chimed with a brisk, energetic rhythm. I was sitting at my kitchen island, sipping a cup of black coffee and reviewing the latest financial reports Vanessa had routed to my secure tablet. I locked the screen, slipped the device into the deep pocket of my bathrobe, and shuffled toward the entryway. Through the frosted glass, I could see the unmistakable silhouette of Bradley, my son-in-law. He was shifting his weight from foot to foot, holding a cardboard tray of expensive coffee shop lattes and a white paper bag that smelled faintly of warm pastries. I opened the door, maintaining the slight slump in my shoulders and the vacant, tired expression I had perfected for Heather the day before. Kofi, my man, Bradley beamed, flashing a set of aggressively whitened teeth. He stepped over the threshold without waiting for an invitation, bringing the smell of high-end cologne and sheer audacity into my hallway. I brought you an espresso and some of those blueberry scones you used to love. LaToya and I have been so worried about you sitting in this big house all by yourself. I figured I would swing by before my morning meetings to check on my favorite father-in-law. I accepted the coffee with a slow, trembling hand. "You are very kind, Bradley," I murmured, letting my voice crack just a fraction. "I am just taking it one day at a time. The pain medicine makes it very hard to focus." "That is exactly why I am here," Kofi Bradley said, guiding me gently toward the kitchen table, as if I were a fragile piece of glass. He set his sleek leather briefcase on the granite countertop with a heavy thud. He pulled out one of the bar stools for me, playing the role of the devoted, helpful family man with sickening perfection. I sat down, wrapping both hands around the warm coffee cup, projecting an aura of complete vulnerability. Bradley unlatched his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of stapled documents. He leaned against the counter, adopting the smooth, practiced cadence of a commercial real estate broker closing a highly contested deal. "Listen, Kofi, we all know you have a lot on your plate right now. The medical bills from your surgery are going to start rolling in soon. On top of that, your property taxes on this lot are scheduled for reassessment next month. With your current health situation, Latoya and I just want to make sure your primary asset is fully protected against any liability." He paused, looking at me with wide, sympathetic eyes. "I spoke to a contact of mine in the insurance industry. He told me that since you are living alone after a major cardiac event, your homeowner liability rates are going to skyrocket. If you have a slip and fall or if you require an emergency medical evacuation from the premises, the insurance company could put a lien on the house to cover the municipal emergency costs. It is a massive risk. But I managed to pull a few strings and get you a supplementary risk management policy. It shields the equity of your home from any medical debt collection." I looked down at the stack of papers. Even with my feigned blurry vision, my trained engineering eyes instantly recognized the standard legal formatting. It was not a supplementary insurance policy. It was a durable power of attorney for real estate transactions. It was an absolute, unconditional transfer of rights granting Bradley full legal authority to list, negotiate, and liquidate my property without my presence, my consent, or my knowledge. He was trying to steal my $1 million home while standing in my kitchen drinking a latte. "You did all this for me, Bradley?" I asked, staring up at him with wide, grateful eyes. "My head has been swimming with all these hospital notices. I just cannot keep up with the paperwork anymore." Bradley smiled a predatory grin that he tried desperately to mask with familial warmth. "That is what family is for, Kofi. You just focus on healing your heart. Let me handle the complicated legal red tape. All I need is your signature on the last page to bind the coverage. We have to act fast, though. The rate lock expires at noon today." He slid the thick packet across the kitchen island, intentionally keeping his large hand pressed firmly over the bold header of the document to obscure the title. With his other hand, he flipped the pages rapidly, skipping past paragraphs of legal clauses detailing the transfer of property rights, real estate broker commissions, and asset liquidation. He stopped on the very last page, pointing a manicured finger at a blank signature line marked Grantor. "I just need your John Hancock right here," Kofi Bradley said, clicking a cheap plastic ballpoint pen and offering it to me. "And because my firm is so strict about liability, I actually brought a mobile notary with me. She is waiting out in my car right now. I can just wave her in to stamp it, saving you the hassle of a trip to the bank." I looked at the cheap plastic pen he was holding out to me, then back at the document. "I should probably read it first, Bradley," I said, rubbing my temples as if I were fighting a massive headache. "But my reading glasses? I think I left them upstairs on my nightstand. My vision is just so blurry today. The words are jumping all over the page." Bradley chuckled a nervous, impatient sound. "Do not even worry about it, Kofi. It is 50 pages of standard insurance boilerplate. I read it twice myself last night to make sure it was bulletproof. It just says the insurance company cannot drop your coverage if you have an accident on the property. I promise you it is completely standard. But like I said, the underwriter needs it transmitted by noon." I hesitated, letting the silence stretch out, watching the subtle panic build in Bradley's posture. His eyes darted from the signature line to my face and back again. The greed radiating from him was almost palpable. "All right," I finally sighed, leaning back in the chair. "If you say it protects the house, I trust you, Bradley. But I cannot sign an official legal document with a cheap plastic pen. A man needs to use his own pen for something this important. Let me just grab mine from the study." Bradley checked his expensive watch, his jaw clenching in irritation, but he forced another bright smile. "Sure thing, Kofi. Take your time. I will just go wave the notary inside." I shuffled slowly down the hallway, maximizing my limp, ensuring Bradley watched my agonizingly slow progress until I turned the corner into my private study. Once out of his line of sight, I dropped the act completely. I walked briskly to my heavy oak desk, unlocked the top right drawer, and reached into the specialized drafting tray. I bypassed the standard ink pens and selected a specific silver-barreled pen I had not used in years. I clicked the mechanism, ensuring the ink cartridge was engaged, and slipped it into my pocket. I returned to the kitchen, perfectly timing my entrance with the arrival of the mobile notary, a young woman carrying a heavy stamp and a leather-bound ledger. She smiled politely, clearly unaware that she was participating in the attempted theft of a senior citizen's entire estate. Bradley smoothed the final page of the document flat against the granite counter, his eyes burning with anticipation. "Right here, Kofi." I took a deep breath, pulling the silver pen from my pocket. My hand shook deliberately as I brought the tip to the paper. I pressed down hard, letting the ink flow generously into the fibers of the page. I signed my full legal name, Kofi James Miller, in a slow, deliberate script. I signed the secondary copy Bradley slid in front of me. I then signed my name in the notary leather ledger exactly where the young woman pointed. She stamped both copies of the document with a loud, satisfying thud, officially notarizing the fraudulent transfer of my property. Bradley's eyes lit up with pure, unadulterated triumph. He practically snatched the papers off the kitchen island, shoving them hastily into his leather briefcase before the ink was even fully dry. He handed the notary a crisp $50 bill and ushered her out the front door. "You are a lifesaver," Kofi Bradley said, turning back to me with a victor smile. "Do not you worry about a single thing anymore. I have got your estate totally handled. You just get some rest." He did not even bother to take his coffee. He walked out the front door, pulling it shut behind him with a solid click. I walked over to the frosted glass pane and watched his luxury sedan speed out of my driveway, tearing down the street toward his commercial brokerage firm. I stood alone in my quiet kitchen, looking down at the silver-barreled pen resting in the palm of my hand. In structural engineering, when drafting initial stress load diagrams on highly sensitive architectural blueprints, you sometimes need to make temporary markings that will not ruin the final schematic. Decades ago, I acquired a set of specialized drafting pens filled with a highly volatile, thermal-degrading vanishing ink. The chemical composition of the ink reacts to the ambient moisture and temperature of the air. When exposed to oxygen, the chemical bonds begin a slow, irreversible breakdown. Within exactly 24 hours, the dark blue ink completely evaporates, leaving absolutely no trace behind. Bradley was currently speeding toward his real estate office, convinced he held the ultimate legal authority to list and liquidate my million-dollar property. He was going to spend the rest of the day calling his wealthy investor clients, leveraging my home to pay off his own debts. But by the time he sat down at the closing table tomorrow morning and proudly opened his briefcase, he would be holding an entirely blank piece of paper. I did not have to wait long for the next visitor. The very next afternoon, the front door swung open with a frantic, unannounced clatter. LaToya burst into the hallway, her designer heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. She was carrying a massive, overly elaborate floral arrangement, the kind you buy at an upscale grocer when you need to quickly manufacture an apology. "Dad!" She called out, her voice pitching into a theatrical, breathless register. "Are you in the kitchen?" I was sitting at the island, slowly eating a bowl of oatmeal. I did not get up. I simply hunched my shoulders a fraction more and let my hand tremble slightly as I held the spoon. "I am right here, LaToya," I answered, my voice soft and raspy. She rounded the corner, her face arranged in an expression of deep, tragic concern. She placed the flowers on the counter with a heavy sigh and immediately rushed over to wrap her arms carefully around my shoulders, making sure not to press against my chest. "Oh, Dad, I am so sorry. I could not be here when you got home," she said, her voice vibrating with manufactured emotion. "The boutique has just been an absolute nightmare this week. I have been working 18-hour days just trying to keep my head above water." I patted her arm weakly. "It is all right, sweetheart. I know you are a very busy woman. The doctor said I just need to rest anyway." She pulled back, looking at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. She was always the performer in the family. When she was a little girl, she used tears to get out of doing her chores. Now she was using them to mask her complicity in a plot to institutionalize me. "You look so tired, Dad," she murmured, pulling out a bar stool and sitting close to me. "Bradley told me he came by to help you with some insurance paperwork yesterday." "I am so glad he did. We just want to make sure you are completely protected." "Yes," I said, keeping my gaze fixed on my bowl of oatmeal. "Bradley was very helpful. He took care of everything." LaToya let out a long, shuddering breath, staring down at her perfectly manicured hands. The silence stretched between us, thick and calculated. She was building up to the pitch. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, calibrating exactly how much guilt and desperation she needed to inject into her performance. "Dad," she finally whispered, a single flawless tear slipping down her cheek. "I do not want to burden you with my problems right now, not when you are recovering. But I am in serious trouble." I looked up at her, letting my eyes widen in feigned alarm. "Trouble? What kind of trouble, LaToya? Are you and Bradley okay?" "We are fine, but the boutique is not," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "The supply chain issues I told you about, they were worse than I thought. My primary overseas vendor went bankrupt and they took my entire fall inventory deposit with them. I have creditors calling me every single day. If I do not come up with $50,000 by the end of the week, they are going to lock the doors and seize my remaining stock. I will lose everything, Dad, everything I have worked for." She reached out and grabbed my trembling hand, squeezing it tight. "I know it is a massive amount of money, and I know you are living on a fixed income, but I am desperate. Bradley's commissions have been slow this quarter and we just do not have the liquidity. If you could just give me a loan, an early advance on my inheritance, anything, I will pay you back every single cent, I swear on my life." I looked at my daughter, listening to her weave a story of complete financial devastation. The tragic irony was that she was actually telling the truth about her business failing, but she was lying about the cause. Her boutique was not failing because of a global supply chain crisis. It was failing because she had been consistently pulling money out of the business operating accounts to fund her extravagant personal lifestyle. She had leased a luxury car, taken 3 international vacations this year alone, and bought designer clothes she could not afford. Yolanda Incorporated property managers had sent me the delinquency reports months ago. She had been bleeding her own business dry, and now the consequences had finally arrived. And instead of taking responsibility, she was sitting in my kitchen, weaponizing my love for her, trying to extract $50,000 from a man she believed was rapidly losing his mind. She wanted me to drain my supposed life savings so she could keep driving a Mercedes while I rotted in a state-funded facility. Oh, LaToya. I breathed, acting deeply distressed by her tears. I had no idea things were so bad. You know your mother and I always wanted to support your dreams. She looked up, hope shining brightly through her crocodile tears. "I know, Dad, and I would not ask if it was not an absolute emergency. You are the only one who can save me." I slowly stood up, leaning heavily against the kitchen counter for support. "Let me go to the study," I muttered, my voice thick with emotion. "Let me see what I can do." "Oh, thank you, Dad," she cried, standing up to hug me again. "Thank you so much." I shuffled down the hallway, maintaining the fragile facade until I reached the privacy of my study. I closed the door silently and walked over to my desk. I did not open the hidden compartment. I did not touch the secure smartphone or the Yolanda Incorporated ledgers. Instead, I opened the top left drawer and pulled out a standard blue checkbook. It was attached to a joint emergency checking account I had opened years ago with Yolanda. It was the account we used to fund family vacations and minor household repairs. But more importantly, it was the exact account I had specifically instructed Vanessa to freeze entirely 48 hours ago. I sat down at the desk, pulled a regular ballpoint pen from the cup, and filled out the check. I wrote LaToya's name on the payee line. I wrote $50,000 in clear, precise numbers. I signed the bottom with my standard legally binding signature. I looked at the slip of paper. It looked completely legitimate. It felt like salvation. But it was actually a financial landmine. When an account is hard frozen for suspicious activity or impending closure, presenting a massive check against it does not just result in a simple insufficient funds bounce. It triggers an automatic mandatory fraud review by the banking institution. The bank would instantly flag the transaction, freeze the payee's accounts for investigation, and immediately audit any outstanding commercial loans associated with her business entity to assess their own risk exposure. LaToya was begging for a lifeline, and I was handing her an anchor. I tore the check from the booklet, folded it neatly in half, and shuffled back out to the kitchen. LaToya was standing by the island, reapplying her lip gloss, using the reflection of her smartphone screen. She quickly shoved the phone away and rearranged her features into an expression of profound gratitude as I walked in. "Here, sweetheart," I said, handing her the folded check. My hand shook violently as I extended it. "I had to move some things around, but I want you to have this. Your mother would want you to keep your business alive." She snatched the check with astonishing speed, her eyes darting over the numbers to confirm the amount. A genuine, massive smile broke across her face, completely shattering her grieving daughter act. "Oh, Dad, you are a lifesaver. she gushed, practically vibrating with relief. "I am going to deposit this right now. You have no idea how much stress you just took off my shoulders." "I know, LaToya," I said softly, looking at her with a sad, empty smile. "I know exactly what I am doing." She did not catch the double meaning. She was too busy calculating how quickly the funds would clear. "I will come back and see you this weekend, I promise," she said, already turning toward the front door. "We will have a nice long dinner. Just you and me." I watched her practically run down the hallway, the heavy oak door slamming shut behind her. I walked over to the frosted glass and watched her luxury sedan speed out of the driveway, racing toward the nearest bank branch. She thought she had just outsmarted a confused old man. She thought she had secured her lifestyle for another 6 months. But the moment she handed that check to a teller, the bank's automated systems would lock down her entire financial existence. 2 days after LaToya frantically sprinted out of my kitchen clutching a financial hand grenade, the heavy oak front door opened again. This time there was no dramatic entrance or performative knocking. Tyson simply unlocked the deadbolt with his spare key and walked in, accompanied by his wife Heather, and a tall, sharp-featured white man wearing a pristine charcoal suit and carrying an oversized leather briefcase. I was sitting in my favorite armchair by the living room window, staring out at the oak tree I had planted decades ago. I was wearing the same faded gray bathrobe, my shoulders hunched, my posture radiating the weary, defeated energy of an old man whose world was rapidly shrinking. I did not turn around when they entered the room. I kept my gaze fixed firmly on the branches swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. "Dad," Tyson said, his voice loud and artificially cheerful, bouncing off the high ceilings of the living room. "Look who came to visit. This is Dr. Sterling. He is a specialist. We asked him to come by and just have a little chat with you. Make sure your recovery is going smoothly." I slowly turned my head, blinking, as if the sudden influx of people had genuinely startled me. "A specialist," I murmured, letting my voice crack slightly. "My cardiologist already cleared me, Tyson. I do not need another doctor." Dr. Sterling stepped forward, offering a smooth, completely hollow smile. He did not look at me like a patient. He looked at me the way an appraiser looks at a piece of commercial property. "Mr. Miller, it is a pleasure to meet you. I am not here to check your physical incisions. I specialize in cognitive wellness and post-operative mental transitions. Tyson and Heather have expressed some deep concerns about your memory and your ability to manage your daily affairs since your surgery. We just want to run a few basic exercises to see where you are at." He did not ask for my consent. He simply pulled up a straight-backed dining chair, placed it directly across from my armchair, and opened his heavy briefcase. Heather and Tyson immediately retreated to the far corner of the living room, whispering to each other, their eyes darting nervously toward the hallway leading to my study. I looked at the doctor. I knew exactly who this man was. He was the corrupt medical professional Bradley had mentioned in the email thread attached to the guardianship petition. He was the hired gun they had brought into my sanctuary to rubber stamp my mental decline. I knew that whatever answers I gave him today, regardless of their accuracy, would be twisted and weaponized into a diagnosis of severe, unmanageable dementia. He was here to legally erase my autonomy. "I am just so tired, doctor," I whispered, leaning my head back against the armchair and closing my eyes. "My children mean well, but they worry too much." Dr. Sterling pulled a silver pen from his pocket and poised it over a thick stack of medical evaluation forms. "Let us just start with some simple baseline questions. Mr. Miller, can you tell me what day of the week it is? Can you tell me who the current president is? And can you please count backward from 100 by sevens?" For the next 45 minutes, I gave the performance of my life. I played the role of a brilliant, stubborn engineer actively fighting a losing battle against a fog he could not control. When he asked me the date, I gave him the correct month but the wrong year. When he asked me to count backward, I executed the math flawlessly for the first 5 numbers, then suddenly stopped, looking deeply confused and frustrated, claiming the medication was making my head swim. I repeatedly asked Tyson where Yolanda was, pretending I had momentarily forgotten that my wife had been dead for 5 years. With every deliberate mistake, I watched Dr. Sterling's pen fly across the evaluation forms. He was not taking objective medical notes. He was aggressively documenting every single fabricated symptom, building an airtight legal case for my immediate institutionalization. In the corner of the room, Heather was practically vibrating with malicious excitement, squeezing Tyson's arm every time I gave an incorrect answer. "I think that is enough for today, Mr. Miller," Dr. Sterling finally said, snapping his briefcase shut with a sharp, definitive click. "You rest now." He stood up and walked over to where Tyson and Heather were standing. The 3 of them moved seamlessly out of the living room and stepped into the long hallway leading toward the kitchen, clearly seeking privacy. They assumed, as they always did, that I was too deaf, too tired, and too checked out to follow them. They assumed they were completely alone. What they did not know was that they were standing exactly 3 feet away from the closed door of the downstairs guest bathroom. And sitting in the dark, perched on the edge of the porcelain bathtub with a parabolic directional microphone pointed directly at the thin wooden door, was Mr. Marcus Vance. Marcus is a former federal investigator who now runs an elite, highly discreet private security firm that Vanessa Wright has kept on a lucrative retainer for Yolanda Incorporated for over a decade. He had slipped through the back door of my house 2 hours before Tyson arrived. He was currently recording every single breath, whisper, and footstep echoing through my hallway in crystal-clear high-definition audio. I remained perfectly still in my armchair, staring out the window, visualizing the exact layout of the hallway, and listening to the muffled voices carrying through the house. Well, Tyson asked, his voice low and urgent. "Is it enough for the judge?" Dr. Sterling let out a soft, arrogant chuckle. "It is more than enough, Tyson. He is exhibiting classic signs of advanced cognitive decline and severe short-term memory loss. He could not even complete a basic cognitive sequence. I will have the formal competency evaluation typed up, signed, and notarized by the end of the business day. You can file the guardianship petition first thing tomorrow morning. The court will grant emergency medical and financial power of attorney without hesitation." Heather let out a long, shuddering breath of pure relief. "Oh, thank God. Bradley has the real estate listing ready to go live on Friday. We need him completely out of the house by the weekend so the staging company can come in. I will fast-track the residential transition recommendation in my report," Dr. Sterling assured them smoothly. "But as we discussed, expedited evaluations require a substantial administrative processing fee. My clinic needs the remaining balance transferred immediately." "I have the cash right here," Tyson replied, the sound of a heavy envelope rustling clearly audible. "10,000, just like we agreed. You get the rest when the judge bangs the gavel." A medical professional licensed by the state actively accepting a $10,000 cash bribe to fraudulently declare an elderly man incompetent. It was a felony of staggering proportions, and Marcus was capturing every single second of the transaction on a secure, encrypted digital recorder. The trap I had laid was no longer just about financial consequences. It had escalated into severe criminal liability. They were not just going to lose their money, they were going to lose their freedom. I heard the front door open and close as Dr. Sterling exited the house, his briefcase $10,000 heavier. Tyson and Heather walked back into the living room, their faces arranged into masks of deep, tragic, familial concern. "Dad," Tyson said, walking over and placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. "The doctor thinks it might be best if you get some specialized care, just for a little while, so you can heal properly without having to worry about managing this big house." I looked up at him, letting a small, grateful smile touch my lips. "Whatever you think is best, son. I know you and LaToya are just trying to protect me. We are, Dad." Heather chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We love you so much." I nodded slowly, letting my chin drop toward my chest. "If I am going to be moving soon," I murmured, "I think we should have one last family dinner here at the house, tomorrow night. Just the 5 of us. I want to say a proper goodbye to this place." Tyson and Heather exchanged a quick, triumphant look. They thought I was surrendering. They thought I was peacefully accepting my forced exile. "Of course, Pops," Tyson said, patting my shoulder again. "I will call LaToya and Bradley right now. We will bring dinner. You just rest." They turned and walked out the front door, leaving me alone in the silent living room. I waited exactly 2 minutes before standing up. The door to the guest bathroom clicked open and Marcus stepped out, pulling a set of heavy headphones away from his ears. He looked at me, a grim, humorless smile on his face. "We got it all, Mr. Miller," Marcus said, tapping the black digital recorder in his hand. "The bribery, the fraud, the entire conspiracy. The audio is flawless." I walked over to the kitchen island and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, standing up, completely straight, the frail, hunched posture vanishing instantly. "Send the file directly to Vanessa," I instructed, my voice hard and clear. "Tell her to prepare the final documents. They are coming for dinner tomorrow night, and I am going to serve them everything they deserve." Friday evening arrived with the heavy, oppressive heat typical of a late summer storm. I stood in my formal dining room looking at the long mahogany table Yolanda and I had purchased after my 3rd patent cleared. I had set the table with our everyday plates, leaving the fine china safely locked away. I was wearing my faded gray bathrobe, the costume of my supposed decline. The doorbell rang right at 7 o'clock. I took a deep, steadying breath and shuffled toward the entryway, making sure my slippers dragged heavily against the hardwood floor. When I opened the heavy oak door, my 4 executioners stood on the porch. Tyson was holding a plastic grocery store bag containing a pre-cooked rotisserie chicken and some cold deli sides. For a man who was about to attempt the theft of $1 million estate, his contribution to our final family dinner was insultingly cheap. LaToya stood next to him holding a bottle of expensive red wine clearly meant for their own celebration, rather than my recovery. Behind them, Bradley and Heather exchanged a quick, excited glance before plastering on masks of deep familial concern. "Hey, Pops," Tyson said, stepping inside and clapping me gently on the shoulder as if a harder touch might shatter me. "We brought dinner. We figured you were too exhausted to cook." "Thank you, son," I whispered, letting my voice tremble. "I am just so tired today." LaToya rushed forward, enveloping me in a suffocating cloud of expensive perfume. "Oh, Daddy, you look absolutely exhausted," she cooed, stepping back to dramatically assess my face. "We are going to get you sorted out tonight, I promise. Everything is going to be so much better." I led them into the dining room. Tyson and LaToya immediately busied themselves unpacking the cheap plastic containers of food, transferring them onto Yolanda immaculate serving platters. But my eyes were fixed on my in-laws. Heather had not even greeted me. She walked straight over to the antique glass display cabinet in the corner of the room. She ran her manicured finger along the polished wood, her eyes locked hungrily on the antique silver tea set Yolanda grandmother had brought over from Atlanta. I could see her mentally packing it into her own luxury SUV. Bradley was not even pretending to care about the family dinner. He was standing near the arched entryway to the living room, physically pacing out the dimensions of the floor. He placed one foot heel to toe against the baseboards, counting the square footage under his breath. He knocked his knuckles against a load-bearing wall, listening to the solid thud of the structural framing. "Good bones," he murmured to himself, a greedy smile spreading across his face. "Really good bones." "Let us sit down, everyone," Tyson called out, uncorking the wine and pouring generous glasses for himself, his sister, and their spouses. He poured me a small glass of tap water and set it near my plate. "We have a lot to talk about tonight." We took our seats around the mahogany table. The tension in the room was palpable, an electric current of anticipation humming beneath their forced, casual conversation. They picked at the dry grocery store chicken, taking large gulps of the rich red wine. I barely touched my food. I kept my hands resting on my lap, allowing them to shake slightly whenever I reached for my glass of water. For the first 20 minutes, they completely ignored me. They talked over my head, discussing upcoming vacations, country club memberships, and expensive home renovations. They were completely intoxicated by their own perceived brilliance, operating under the absolute certainty that they had already won. They were spending my money before the ink was even on the page. Finally, Tyson cleared his throat and set his fork down. He shot a highly coordinated look across the table at Bradley. The casual dinner atmosphere vanished instantly, replaced by a heavy, suffocating seriousness. Dad Tyson began leaning forward and folding his hands together on top of the table. "LaToya and I have been doing a lot of talking this week. We have been consulting with Dr. Sterling and reviewing the reality of your situation. This recovery has been incredibly hard on you. We can all see it. You are struggling to keep up with the house, and your memory is just not what it used to be." I looked down at my plate, putting on an expression of profound confusion and shame. "I am doing my best, Tyson," I mumbled. "We know you are, Daddy," LaToya chimed in, reaching across the table to cover my hand with hers. Her skin felt ice cold. "But your best is just not enough right now. You are in danger living here all alone. What if you fall? What if you forget to turn off the stove? We love you too much to let you become a danger to yourself. We have found a wonderful place for you. It is a premium care facility with 24-hour nursing staff. You will not have to worry about cooking or cleaning or paying bills ever again." Heather took a sip of her wine, hiding a triumphant smirk behind the rim of her glass. "It really is for the best, Kofi. You simply cannot manage this estate anymore. It is time to let the next generation step up and handle the heavy lifting." Bradley reached down and lifted his sleek leather briefcase onto his lap. He popped the brass latches with a sharp, echoing click. "We actually have the admission paperwork right here, Kofi," he said, his voice slick and persuasive. "The facility is in high demand, but because of my corporate connections, I managed to secure a premium bed for you. They can admit you as early as tomorrow morning. We just need to finalize the transition." Bradley pulled a thick stack of documents from his briefcase and slid them across the polished mahogany table until they rested directly in front of my plate. I looked down at the paperwork. The bold header did not say Premium Care Facility Admission. It said voluntary surrender of autonomy and medical power of attorney. Buried beneath the legal jargon was a binding clause granting Tyson and LaToya complete, absolute control over my medical decisions, my physical placement, and the immediate liquidation of my residential assets to fund a state-mandated care facility. It was the final nail in the coffin. Tyson pulled a heavy silver pen from his shirt pocket. He clicked the top and gently nudged it toward my shaking hand. "Just sign on the dotted lines, Dad. There are 3 places marked with a yellow sticky note. Do not worry about reading all the legal mumbo-jumbo. Bradley and I already went through it with a fine-tooth comb. It just gives us the legal authority to get you moved in tomorrow." LaToya squeezed my hand one more time. "We are going to pack up a nice bag for you tonight, Daddy. You do not even have to lift a finger. Just sign the papers, and you can finally go to sleep and stop worrying." They sat back in their chairs, a collective holding of breath. They expected me to squint at the tiny font. They expected me to fumble for the reading glasses I did not have in my pocket. They expected the tired, broken old man to blindly sign away his freedom out of pure exhaustion and misplaced trust. They stared at the silver pen resting on the table, waiting for my trembling fingers to pick it up. I looked at the silver pen. I looked at the fraudulent legal documents. And then slowly I looked at each of the 4 people sitting around my dining table. I did not reach for my reading glasses. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I placed my hands flat against the mahogany wood and stopped shaking. The manufactured tremor in my fingers vanished instantly. I rolled my shoulders back, releasing the hunched posture I had maintained for days. I sat up completely straight, letting my full height and presence fill the dining chair. The frail, confused old pensioner evaporated into thin air, replaced entirely by the senior structural engineer who had commanded boardrooms and dominated contract negotiations for decades. The sudden physical transformation was so stark and immediate that Tyson actually recoiled slightly in his chair. LaToya pulled her hand away from mine as if she had just touched a live electrical wire. The smug, satisfied smiles melted off Heather and Bradley faces, replaced by a sudden creeping confusion. I pushed the stack of nursing home papers back across the table with a single definitive motion. I looked Tyson dead in the eye, my voice suddenly sharp, cold, and commanding. "I assume the BBQ you had while I was dying in the hospital was delicious." The silence that followed my question was so profound, so absolute, that I could clearly hear the faint ticking of Yolanda's antique grandfather clock in the hallway. I watched as the blood completely drained from Tyson's face, leaving him a pale, ashen gray. LaToya's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Heather and Bradley remained frozen, their eyes locked on me, their arrogant smirks wiped clean away by the sudden chilling shift in my demeanor. I did not break eye contact. I let the weight of my words press down on them, pinning them to their expensive dining chairs. I did not ask if they enjoyed the barbecue. I stated it as a verified fact, and the sheer impossibility of me knowing that detail short-circuited their carefully constructed reality. "I am waiting for an answer," I said, my voice dropping an octave. Carrying the deep, resonant authority I used to command engineering teams on multi-million-dollar construction sites. "You told the hospital staff you were buried in a massive site inspection, Tyson. LaToya, you claimed you were drowning in a supply chain crisis. Yet my own 2 eyes saw you flipping ribs and drinking white wine on my patio while I was lying in a sterile hospital bed, dragging myself out of open-heart surgery without a single family member by my side." Tyson swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his shirt collar. He looked at LaToya, his eyes silently screaming for backup, but she was staring at her plate completely paralyzed. Dad, Tyson finally stammered, his voice thin and reedy. "I do not know what you are talking about. The medication must be causing hallucinations. Dr. Sterling warned us this might happen. You are confused." I let out a short, humorless laugh that echoed sharply against the mahogany walls. "Hallucinations. Is that the narrative we are going with tonight? That is a very convenient diagnosis for a man who wants to steal his father's house." I stood up from the table. I did not lean on the chair for support. I did not shuffle my feet. I walked with steady, measured steps toward the arched entryway leading into the living room. I picked up the small black remote control resting on the side table and pointed it directly at the large, flat-screen television mounted above the fireplace. "Let us see just how confused I really am," I said, pressing the power button. The screen flared to life, illuminating the dim living room with a bright, crisp light. I did not play a movie or a news channel. I had synced my secure smartphone directly to the television, pulling the encrypted video files Marcus had compiled for me. The first video played in complete, damning silence. It was high-definition footage shot from the discreet security camera I had installed in my private study 3 days ago. The camera angle perfectly captured the center of the room, focusing entirely on the Persian rug and the heavy steel floor safe beneath it. Heather gasped a sharp, involuntary sound of pure horror as her own face appeared on the 70-inch screen. The video showed her on her hands and knees, frantically punching numbers into the safe's electronic keypad. It showed her slamming her palm against the steel door in frustration when the red error light flashed. It captured the exact moment her fake, compassionate daughter-in-law persona vanished, replaced entirely by a mask of greedy, entitled rage. I paused the video, freezing Heather's contorted face on the screen. "Tell me, Heather," I said, my voice slicing through the thick, tense air of the dining room. "Were you checking my structural integrity when you tried to crack my safe? Or were you just looking for the deed to this house so Bradley could fast-track his real estate listing?" Heather's face flushed a deep mottled red, but she clamped her mouth shut, utterly unable to formulate a lie in the face of absolute, undeniable proof. I pressed play again, skipping to the next file. This time there was audio, crystal clear, professionally captured audio. It was the recording Marcus had pulled from the parabolic microphone aimed at the guest bathroom door just 24 hours ago. The sound of Dr. Sterling's smooth, arrogant voice filled my living room. "He is exhibiting classic signs of advanced cognitive decline. I will have the formal competency evaluation typed up, signed, and notarized by the end of the business day. You can file the guardianship petition first thing tomorrow morning." Then Tyson's voice echoed through the speakers, loud and unmistakable. "I have the cash right here. 10,000, just like we agreed. You get the rest when the judge bangs the gavel." I paused the audio, letting the sheer criminality of that exchange ring in their ears. I looked directly at my son, the boy I had raised to be an honorable man, the engineer I had proudly watched graduate at the top of his class. $10,000, I stated flatly, shaking my head in disgust. "You valued my freedom, my mind, and my entire life at $10,000 in a cheap envelope. You bribed a licensed medical professional to legally declare your own father incompetent so you could seize control of my assets and throw me into a state-funded facility. You traded my dignity for a real estate transaction." Tyson was physically trembling now, his hands gripping the edge of the mahogany table so tightly his knuckles were turning white. He looked like a trapped animal, his eyes darting frantically around the room, desperately searching for an exit, an excuse, a lie that could possibly save him. "Dad, please." Tyson choked out, his voice cracking with genuine panic. "You have to understand. We were desperate. The bills, the debts we just needed." He stopped, unable to finish the sentence, realizing that any justification he offered would only further incriminate him. He fell back on his final pathetic defense mechanism, the gaslighting. "This is crazy," Tyson yelled, standing up abruptly from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "You recorded us. You spied on us. This just proves exactly what Dr. Sterling said. You are paranoid, Dad. You are sick. You are hallucinating a massive conspiracy because your brain is failing. You need help." He pointed a shaking finger at me, clinging desperately to the narrative that I was a broken, senile old man. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue with him. I simply walked back to the dining table with slow, deliberate precision. I reached into the deep pocket of my bathrobe and pulled out a crisp, heavy-stock manila folder. It was sealed with the official embossed crest of my actual cardiac surgeon, the chief of cardiovascular surgery at the city's premier medical research hospital. I tossed the folder onto the center of the table. It landed with a soft, authoritative thud, resting directly on top of Bradley's fraudulent nursing home admission papers. "I am not hallucinating, Tyson," I said, staring at him with eyes as cold and hard as steel. I slid the pristine, flawless psychiatric and cognitive evaluation from my actual surgeon across the table. "I suggest you read that very carefully before you speak to me again." Tyson reached out with a trembling hand and pulled the heavy stock folder toward his chest. He opened it slowly, as if the paper itself might burn him. He read the chief cardiovascular surgeon's flawless assessment of my mental acuity. The room was so completely silent that I could hear the sharp intake of breath from LaToya as she read the conclusion over her brother's shoulder. The medical director of the most prestigious hospital in the state had declared me entirely sound of mind, possessing an intellect and memory retention ranking in the top 1% of my age demographic. I watched the last remaining shreds of their fabricated reality crumble into dust. "You both thought I was just a tired old man waiting to die," I said, my voice echoing off the dining room walls. "You thought my entire net worth was tied up in the equity of this house and a modest monthly pension. You looked at the life your mother and I built, and you saw an easy target. You assumed we were simple people, but you severely underestimated who raised you. I walked to the head of the mahogany table and placed both hands firmly on the polished wood. Let me tell you a story about your mother, I continued, making sure to look Latoya and Tyson directly in their eyes. Yolanda was a brilliant forensic accountant. 30 years ago, when my first major patent for seismic reinforcement materials was acquired for global commercial use, the financial payout was staggering. It was generational wealth, the kind of money that changes a bloodline forever. But your mother and I made a strict pact. We decided to hide it from you. We created a private holding company called Yolanda Incorporated and buried our fortune behind layers of corporate protection. Heather let out a sharp gasp, her eyes widening as the dollar signs registered in her greedy mind. Bradley shifted his weight, suddenly leaning forward with renewed predatory interest. We stayed in this house, I explained, gesturing around the dining room. We drove standard cars and lived on a strict budget because we wanted you to be hungry. We wanted you to learn the value of hard work and self-reliance. We thought shielding you from massive wealth would protect your character. But we were wrong. It did not make you humble. It made you arrogant, entitled, and entirely predatory toward what little you thought we had. You became the exact kind of vultures we were trying to protect you from. Tyson shook his head, dropping the psychiatric evaluation onto the table. He looked up at me, his expression a chaotic mix of awe and terror. Yolanda Incorporated. He whispered the name, clearly triggering a terrifying recognition in his brain. Yes, Tyson, I replied, locking my gaze onto him. Yolanda Incorporated, the massive, faceless conglomerate that you love to brag about at your corporate networking events. The same holding company that effectively owns Apex Commercial Construction. You walk around your job sites acting like a self-made titan of industry barking orders and taking credit for multi-million-dollar projects. But you have absolutely no idea who actually funds your paychecks. My holding company holds the primary commercial debt for Apex. We are the silent guarantors for the massive surety bonds on every single one of your current development projects. Tyson gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning stark white. He opened his mouth to speak, but I did not give him the chance to form a single excuse. For the last 10 days, I continued, my voice steady and relentless. You have weaponized your career to avoid visiting me in the hospital. You claimed you were too busy managing your sites to check on your father after open heart surgery. You skipped your shifts to stand in my backyard and plot my institutionalization. So I decided to relieve you of that massive professional burden. I instructed my legal team to pull our guarantee. I called in the commercial debt. Your executives have been scrambling in a blind panic for 48 hours, desperately trying to figure out why their funding miraculously dried up. And when corporate executives face sudden financial strangulation, they immediately look for the most expensive, useless deadweight on their payroll to cut costs. Latoya started to cry, real heavy tears of absolute panic streaming down her face. She reached out toward me, her hands shaking violently. "Daddy, please," she sobbed. I turned my cold gaze toward my daughter. "And you, Latoya," I said, my tone devoid of any parental warmth. "You sat in my kitchen and cried crocodile tears about global supply chain issues ruining your high-end boutique. You begged me for $50,000, claiming you would lose everything. The tragic irony is that you were telling the truth about failing but lying about the cause. You bled your own business dry to fund your luxury cars and international vacations. You thought you could extract my life savings to cover your reckless tracks." She choked on a sob, shaking her head vigorously in denial, but I pressed forward. "Yolanda Incorporated owns the entire commercial block where your boutique is located," I revealed. "You have not paid your lease in 3 months. I am the one who instructed the property management company to forgive your late fees and ignore your delinquency to keep your little dream afloat. But that protection ended the moment I found out you were pricing out cheap nursing homes for me." "But the check," Latoya stammered, her chest heaving with panic. "You gave me the $50,000 check. I deposited it." "I gave you a check from a joint account I had already hard frozen for suspicious activity," I corrected her. Presenting a massive check against a frozen account does not just bounce. It triggers an automatic mandatory fraud review. The bank instantly flagged your transaction. They locked down your entire financial existence pending a federal investigation. You begged for a lifeline, and I handed you an anchor. The reality of their absolute ruin settled heavily over the dining room. Tyson was staring blankly at the wall, his breathing shallow and rapid. Latoya had buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with loud, uncontrollable sobs. Heather was completely silent, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror as she calculated the impending collapse of her lavish lifestyle. Suddenly, Bradley slammed his fist down hard on the mahogany table, rattling the wine glasses. He stood up, his face flushed an ugly dark red. He puffed out his chest, trying to project the aggressive, domineering real estate broker persona he used to intimidate weak clients. "You think you are so smart, old man," Bradley shouted, jabbing a finger aggressively in my direction. "You think you hold all the cards just because you have some secret bank accounts. But you forgot one massive detail. I do not care about Tyson Construction Firm, and I do not care about Latoya Boutique. You can play your little corporate games all you want, but you cannot touch me." He reached down and patted his sleek leather briefcase sitting on the floor next to his chair. "I hold the legal rights to this property," Bradley sneered, his voice dripping with venomous triumph. "You signed a durable power of attorney right in front of me and a licensed notary. You transferred full authority to list, negotiate, and liquidate this house. It does not matter how many millions you have hidden away in your holding company. I control this asset now. I am going to sell this property right out from under you, and there is absolutely nothing your lawyers can do to stop a legally binding notarized contract." I looked at Bradley, observing the frantic, desperate greed shining in his eyes. He truly believed he had outsmarted me. He believed he was the apex predator in the room. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply stood my ground and delivered the final devastating blow. I looked at them dead in the eye. "Tyson, your firm's line of credit was pulled this morning. Latoya, your eviction notice for the boutique is taped to your storefront right now." Bradley stood frozen at the end of the table, his arms still aggressively extended in my direction. The blood that had rushed to his face just moments ago seemed to pool heavily in his cheeks, painting them a violent shade of crimson. He let out a sharp, incredulous bark of laughter, a sound utterly devoid of genuine amusement. It was the desperate, hollow sound of a man trying to convince himself that the floor was not dropping out from beneath his feet. "You are bluffing," Bradley spat, his voice tight and ragged. "You are sitting there in a bathrobe trying to pull a fast one. Do you really think I am that stupid? I know how real estate works, Kofi. I know the law. You cannot just snap your fingers and erase a notarized, legally binding contract. I have the power of attorney right here in my briefcase. It is signed. It is stamped. It is bulletproof. I control this house, and I am listing it tomorrow." He dropped his hand and frantically snapped open the brass latches of his sleek leather briefcase. He rummaged through the meticulously organized compartments, pulling out the thick stack of papers he had manipulated me into signing just yesterday morning. He held the document up like a holy relic, a physical shield against the devastating reality I had just dropped on their heads. "Look at it," Bradley commanded, practically shoving the paper toward my face. "Read the signature line." I did not move. I simply raised a single eyebrow, maintaining an expression of absolute, unbothered calm. "I think you should be the one to look at it, Bradley," I suggested, my voice smooth and perfectly level. "I think you should look very closely at the signature line." Bradley frowned, his arrogant sneer faltering for the first time. He pulled the document back, adjusting his posture to catch the warm glow of the dining room chandelier. He flipped to the very last page, his eyes darting immediately to the bottom right corner where the grantor's signature was supposed to be. He stared at the paper, then he blinked, shaking his head slightly, and stared at it again. He brought the document closer to his face, his eyes wide and frantic, scanning the blank white space where my name should have been written in bold, dark ink. "What is this?" Bradley muttered, his voice dropping to a confused, panicked whisper. "What did you do?" I used a specialized drafting pen. I explained the words, clipping through the air with surgical precision. As a structural engineer, I often work with highly sensitive schematics that require temporary stress load markings. Yesterday, when you so generously brought me that fraudulent power of attorney, I signed it using a highly volatile, thermal-degrading, vanishing ink. The chemical bonds in that specific ink break down completely when exposed to oxygen. Within 24 hours, it evaporates entirely, leaving absolutely no trace behind. Bradley's hands began to shake violently, the pristine white paper rattling between his fingers. He flipped frantically to the notary's stamp, but the signature line beneath it was equally flawlessly blank. The legal authority he thought he held, the million-dollar asset he was already spending in his head, had literally vanished into thin air. "You do not control this house, Bradley," I stated, my voice ringing with finality. "You control a blank piece of paper. And unfortunately for you, my private investigator has confirmed that you have already started leveraging this property to cover your own mounting commercial debts. When your investors realize you tried to secure their funding with a fraudulent unsigned contract, they are not going to take you to civil court. They are going to have you indicted for wire fraud." Bradley dropped the document onto the table as if it had burst into flames. He stumbled backward, colliding heavily with the antique glass display cabinet. The fine china inside rattled ominously, mirroring the sudden catastrophic collapse of his entire professional existence. Heather, who had been sitting in stunned silence, suddenly let out a sharp, hysterical breath. She looked at Bradley's blank paper, then turned her wide, terrified eyes toward Tyson, who was still staring blankly at his own hands. "Tyson, do something!" Heather shrieked, her voice pitching into a shrill, desperate register. "He cannot do this. He cannot just take your job and LaToya's store. We have to call a lawyer. We have to fight this. He is a sick old man. We can still prove he is incompetent. We have Dr. Sterling's evaluation." I turned my gaze toward my daughter-in-law, the woman who had stood in my private study and called me a filthy burden while trying to crack my floor safe. "Dr. Sterling's evaluation is entirely worthless, Heather," I said coldly, because my private investigator captured crystal-clear audio of Tyson handing him a $10,000 cash bribe to falsify that medical report. I have already forwarded that recording to my legal team, and they are preparing to hand it directly to the medical licensing board and the district attorney. Heather flinched as if I had physically struck her, but she desperately tried to maintain her aggressive, entitled facade. "You have no proof of anything else," she spat, her hands gripping the edge of the mahogany table. "You are just trying to scare us. We did not do anything illegal." "Are you absolutely sure about that, Heather?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet rumble, because my credit card company flagged a rather interesting transaction yesterday afternoon. I reached into the pocket of my bathrobe and pulled out my secure smartphone. I tapped the screen, bringing up the digital banking alert, and placed the phone face up on the polished wood, sliding it precisely until it rested in front of her perfectly manicured hands. $15,000, I read aloud, ensuring every syllable landed with maximum impact. "Attempted at Romanov luxury timepieces. Charged to a joint credit card that you assumed I was too senile to monitor. You left my house furious that you could not steal the documents in my safe, and you immediately drove to a jewelry store to buy a Rolex with my money." Heather's face drained of all color, her aggressive posture collapsing instantly. She stared at the digital alert on the screen, her mouth opening and closing in a silent, panicked sequence. I declined the charge and reported it as fraud. I continued relentless. Attempting to execute a $15,000 transaction on an unauthorized card crosses the threshold into felony wire fraud. You are facing federal charges, Heather. And when the authorities audit your accounts, they are going to find a very clear, very damning pattern of elder financial abuse. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with the realization of their absolute, inescapable ruin. I had systematically dismantled every single pillar of their lives. Tyson's career was over. LaToya's business was gone. Bradley was facing indictment for real estate fraud, and Heather was looking at federal charges for credit card theft. They had walked into my home believing they were the apex predators, untouchable and supreme. They were now leaving as destitute, desperate criminals. And then, exactly as I had predicted, the foundation cracked and they immediately turned on each other. "You idiot!" Heather suddenly screamed, whirling around to face Tyson. Her voice was raw and furious, stripping away every ounce of her polished, high society persona. "I told you this was a mistake. I told you we should have just let the hospital transition him. You are the one who insisted on the fake doctor. You are the one who handed over the cash bribe. You dragged me into this federal conspiracy." Tyson snapped out of his catatonic shock, his face contorting with defensive rage. "Dragged you into this!" he yelled back, slamming his fist onto the table. "You are the one who tried to buy a $15,000 watch with a stolen credit card. You are the one who could not wait 5 minutes to start spending his money. Do not sit there and act like you are the victim here, Heather. You were practically salivating over his antique silver before we even sat down." Across the table, the situation was detonating with equal ferocity. Bradley turned on LaToya, his eyes wild and accusing. "This is your fault," he hissed, jabbing a finger at her tear-stained face. "You told me he was an easy mark. You told me he had no idea what was going on with the estate. I put my entire broker's license on the line for this. My investors are going to destroy me, LaToya, because of your brilliant little plan." LaToya shot up from her chair, her face twisted in a mixture of profound betrayal and defensive fury. "My plan," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You are the one who drafted the fake power of attorney. You are the one who was laughing about selling the house while he was in the hospital. Do not you dare put this on me, Bradley. I begged you to help me with the boutique, and you told me the only way out was to liquidate my father's assets." The dining room erupted into a chaotic, vicious screaming match. The pristine illusion of their perfect, successful marriages dissolved into toxic, venomous accusations. They were no longer family. They were cornered animals viciously tearing at each other's throats, desperately trying to assign blame and escape the crushing weight of the consequences I had just dropped on them. I stood at the head of the table, perfectly silent, perfectly still, watching the destruction of their lives unfold. I did not intervene. I did not raise my voice to quiet them. I simply watched the beautiful, intricate house of cards they had built completely shatter, buried under the sheer weight of their own arrogance and greed. The sudden, brutal infighting was a spectacle of absolute moral bankruptcy. Tyson, LaToya, Bradley, and Heather were screaming at each other, their voices echoing off the high ceilings of my dining room, completely consumed by the desperate need to deflect blame. They had spent the last 2 weeks functioning as a synchronized predatory unit, bound together by the shared goal of stripping me of my autonomy and my assets. The moment that shared goal was obliterated, their alliance instantly dissolved into toxic, venomous chaos. I stood at the head of the mahogany table, my hands resting lightly on the polished wood, observing the destruction. I did not feel a single ounce of satisfaction. I did not feel the triumphant rush of a victorious general. I only felt a deep, profound sadness. I was looking at the children Yolanda and I had raised, the children we had sacrificed for, and realizing that we had inadvertently engineered 2 incredibly successful, utterly hollow human beings. I waited until their screaming reached a fever pitch, until Bradley was practically foaming at the mouth, and Heather was openly weeping in sheer terrified frustration. Enough, I said. I did not shout. I did not need to. My voice cut through their chaotic screaming like a steel blade through silk. The sheer resonant authority of that single word silenced the room instantly. Tyson snapped his mouth shut, his chest heaving. LaToya wiped her tear-streaked face, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. You came into my home tonight intending to serve me with papers that would end my life as a free man, I said, my gaze sweeping slowly across the 4 of them. You sat at my table, drank my wine, and smiled in my face while secretly plotting to lock me away and liquidate my existence. You have shown me exactly who you are, and you have shown me exactly what I mean to you. You are no longer my family. You are simply liabilities, and I am formally cutting my losses. LaToya let out a sharp, devastated sob, reaching a trembling hand out toward me across the table. "Daddy, please!" She choked out, her voice raw and pleading. "Do not say that. We made a mistake. We made a terrible, stupid mistake. But we are still your children. You cannot just cut us off." I looked at my daughter, the girl who used to sit on my lap, and asked me to explain how bridges were built. "I am not cutting you off, LaToya," I replied, my voice devoid of any parental warmth. "I am simply allowing you to experience the full, unfiltered consequences of the reality you tried to build for me. You wanted me out of this house by the weekend. You wanted my assets liquidated. I am just honoring the timeline you established." I reached into the deep pocket of my bathrobe and pulled out my secure smartphone. I pressed a single button on the screen and placed the device back in my pocket. "You have exactly 2 minutes to gather your things and exit my property," I stated, my tone absolute and unyielding. Tyson shook his head violently, his face a mask of stubborn, desperate denial. "Dad, be reasonable," he argued, his voice pitching high with panic. "You cannot just kick us out like this. We need to sit down and figure this out. I can talk to the executives at Apex. I can fix the commercial debt. We can hire a lawyer to deal with the fraud charges. We just need to strategize." "You do not have a strategy, Tyson," I corrected him coldly. "You have a massive impending legal disaster, and you are going to face it entirely on your own." Suddenly, the heavy, rhythmic thud of deliberate footsteps echoed from the long hallway leading toward the front of the house. The sound was not the soft shuffle of a confused old man. It was the sharp, authoritative click of expensive heels against hardwood, accompanied by the distinct, heavy tread of tactical boots. The 4 of them froze their eyes, darting nervously toward the arched entryway of the dining room. A moment later, Ms. Vanessa Wright stepped into the room. She was wearing a flawless, tailored navy blue suit, her expression arranged into a mask of pure corporate lethality. She was holding a thick, pristine stack of legal documents in her manicured hands. And flanking her on either side, their hands resting comfortably near their utility belts, were 2 fully uniformed officers from the local municipal police department. The visual impact of the police officers standing in my dining room was devastating. Heather let out a sharp, high-pitched gasp, shrinking back into her chair as if she were trying to physically disappear into the upholstery. Bradley's face drained of all remaining color, his aggressive, domineering posture collapsing instantly into pure, terrified submission. "Good evening, Vanessa," said her voice smooth, professional, and entirely devoid of warmth. I am Vanessa Wright, lead corporate counsel for Yolanda Incorporated and personal legal representative for Mr. Kofi Miller. She stepped forward, flanked by the two officers, and began dealing the legal documents across the mahogany table with the rapid, precise efficiency of a casino dealer. She did not hand them over. She slapped them down directly in front of each person. Tyson Miller, Vanessa stated, dropping a thick packet in front of his shaking hands. You are hereby served with a formal notice of default regarding the commercial lines of credit held by Apex Construction. Furthermore, you are served with an emergency restraining order effective immediately, barring you from coming within 500 feet of Mr. Miller or any of his primary residences. Tyson stared at the documents, his mouth opening and closing in a silent, panicked sequence, utterly unable to process the speed and absolute finality of his ruin. LaToya Miller Grant Vanessa continued moving down the table. You are served with an immediate commercial eviction notice for your retail boutique, citing 3 months of delinquent lease payments. You are also served with an identical emergency restraining order. LaToya collapsed forward, burying her face in her arms, her loud, racking sobs echoing sharply through the silent dining room. Heather Miller. Vanessa said, her voice dropping an octave, carrying a distinctly dangerous edge. You are served with a formal cease and desist regarding any further attempts to access Mr. Miller's financial accounts. You should also be aware that a comprehensive fraud report regarding your attempted $15,000 transaction has already been transmitted to the federal authorities. I suggest you retain aggressive criminal defense counsel immediately. Heather did not even look at the paper. She just stared blankly at the wall, her chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths, completely paralyzed by the impending federal indictment. And finally, Bradley Grant, Vanessa said, pausing directly in front of my son-in-law. She did not slap a document down on the table. She simply looked at him with absolute, unmasked contempt. You are not being served with civil paperwork tonight, Bradley. My office has already forwarded the fraudulent, unsigned power of attorney you attempted to execute, along with the audio recordings of your conspiracy to commit elder fraud, directly to the district attorney's office and the state real estate licensing board. Your broker's license will be suspended by Monday morning, and you will likely be indicted for wire fraud shortly thereafter. Bradley looked down at his sleek leather briefcase, the symbol of his arrogant, predatory career, which now contained nothing but the blank, vanishing ink evidence of his own destruction. He did not say a word. He simply lowered his head, completely and utterly defeated. Vanessa stepped back, aligning herself perfectly with the two police officers. You have all been officially served, she stated, her voice ringing with absolute finality. You are currently in violation of an active court-ordered restraining order. You will now vacate this property immediately, or these officers will place you in handcuffs and physically remove you for criminal trespassing. The officers stepped forward simultaneously, their presence communicating an absolute, undeniable reality. This was not a negotiation. It was an eviction. Get up, the older officer commanded, his voice deep and authoritative. Let us go. Now. They stood up slowly, moving like sleepwalkers, their bodies heavy and uncoordinated. LaToya was sobbing uncontrollably, reaching blindly for Bradley's arm, but he pulled away from her, his face a mask of bitter, resentful fury. Tyson stumbled toward the entryway, his eyes wide and vacant, completely shattered by the total collapse of his personal and professional world. Heather followed him, keeping her head down, desperately trying to avoid the stern, judgmental gazes of the police officers. I followed them out of the dining room and stood in the grand entryway, watching them shuffle out onto the front porch. The warm, humid night air washed over them, a stark contrast to the cold, clinical reality of their impending ruin. Daddy, please, LaToya cried, turning back toward me as she stood on the top step. Her mascara was smeared, her face contorted with genuine, desperate agony. Please do not do this. I am your daughter. I love you. I looked at my daughter, feeling the deep, familiar ache in my freshly wired sternum. I love you too, LaToya, I said quietly, my voice steady and resolute. But I can no longer afford to let your love destroy me. I stepped back, gripped the heavy brass handle of the solid oak front door, and pulled it firmly shut. The heavy deadbolt clicked into place with a loud, definitive snap, severing the connection completely. I stood alone in the grand entryway of my home. The silence that settled over the house was not the cold, isolating quiet of abandonment I had feared during that lonely Uber ride. It was the deep, resonant, profound silence of absolute peace. The toxicity had been physically, legally, and permanently removed. I was entirely alone, and for the first time in weeks, I was completely safe. Exactly 3 months passed. The seasons changed, and with them, the entire landscape of my existence shifted into a completely new configuration. I stood in the center of the dismantled living room, watching a team of professional movers carefully wrap Yolanda antique grandfather clock in thick protective blankets. The heavy oak front door was propped wide open, allowing the crisp autumn air to circulate through the empty hallways. The house was silent, but it was no longer the suffocating, isolating silence of abandonment. It was the clean, productive quiet of a finished project. In structural engineering, there comes a time when you have to admit a building has outlived its original purpose. You can patch the drywall, reinforce the joists, and apply fresh coats of paint, but if the foundation has been permanently compromised by toxic elements, the only logical solution is a controlled demolition. This house held decades of beautiful memories of my late wife, but it had also become the staging ground for my attempted destruction. I refused to spend my remaining years walking past the dining room table where my own flesh and blood tried to legally erase my humanity. I refused to look out at the backyard patio where they drank wine and celebrated my impending institutionalization. The structure was tainted. I had to tear it down. Vanessa Wright handled the real estate transaction with her trademark corporate ruthlessness. She bypassed the standard residential market entirely and leveraged her firm private network to list the property as an off-market exclusive. Within 48 hours, we received an all-cash offer from an out-of-state technology executive relocating to the area. The final sale price was $1.5 million. There were no contingencies, no prolonged inspections, and no agonizing negotiations. It was a clean, absolute severing of ties. I signed the final closing documents sitting at the granite island in the kitchen, the exact same spot where Bradley had arrogantly shoved that fraudulent power of attorney into my hands. This time I used a standard permanent black ink pen. I watched the escrow officer stamp the paperwork, officially transferring the deed out of my name. The entire $1.5 million sum was wired directly into the secure encrypted accounts of Yolanda Incorporated within the hour. As the movers carried the last cardboard box out to the idling transport truck, I took one final walk through the empty rooms. I ran my hand along the wooden banister of the staircase. I looked into the master bedroom where they had packed my life into donation bins while I was lying in a hospital bed. I felt absolutely nothing. No lingering attachment, no devastating nostalgia. I simply locked the heavy front door, handed the brass keys to the escrow agent waiting on the porch, and walked away without looking back. I relocated to a temporary executive suite in a high-security luxury high-rise downtown while my permanent residence was being finalized. It was there, sitting in a leather chair overlooking the sprawling city skyline, that I received the final closure report from Marcus. I had not actively sought out information regarding my former family members. I had cut them off, completely changing my phone numbers, securing my physical locations, and relying entirely on Vanessa firm to act as a permanent, impenetrable barrier. But as a man accustomed to managing large-scale projects, I required a final status update to ensure the structural hazards had been completely neutralized. Marcus slid a thick manila folder across the glass coffee table. The contents were a masterclass in the brutal, unforgiving mechanics of consequence. Tyson had experienced a catastrophic professional freefall. When Yolanda Incorporated pulled the commercial debt guarantees from Apex Construction, the firm executives panicked. To appease their remaining creditors and salvage their operational liquidity, they initiated an immediate, ruthless purge of their upper management. Tyson was the very first casualty. Stripped of his six-figure salary and his inflated corporate title, his carefully hidden financial reality rapidly caught up with him. The investigation Marcus conducted revealed that Tyson had amassed crippling underground gambling debts. Without my secret emergency funds to bail him out, his creditors descended like wolves. He was forced to liquidate his luxury SUV, his expensive watches, and the majority of his personal assets just to keep his legs from being broken. He was currently working brutal 14-hour shifts as a manual laborer for a non-union concrete pouring crew on the outskirts of the city. The man who used to strut around commercial sites in crisp linen shirts playing the role of a self-made titan was now hauling 80-pound bags of cement, breathing in toxic dust and destroying his back just to make minimum payments on his crushing debts. Heather, of course, filed for divorce the very second his bank accounts hit zero. She abandoned him with the exact same ruthless speed she had planned to abandon me. But her own situation was equally dire. She was currently fighting a looming federal indictment for the $15,000 credit card fraud, struggling to pay a discount defense attorney while her high society friends completely ostracized her. LaToya reality was just as bleak. The commercial eviction from her high-end boutique was swift and legally absolute. Her inventory was seized and liquidated at auction to cover the massive lease delinquency she had accumulated. Her identity as a glamorous independent business owner evaporated overnight. Without her boutique to shield her, she was forced into the brutal, unforgiving trenches of minimum wage retail. Marcus provided a photograph. LaToya was currently employed as a floor associate at a fast fashion chain store in a rundown strip mall. She was wearing a cheap polyester uniform, folding endless stacks of graphic t-shirts, and forced to smile at the exact type of rude, demanding customers she used to openly mock. Her marriage to Bradley had imploded with spectacular velocity. After Vanessa forwarded the audio recordings and the fraudulent Vanishing Ink contract to the state licensing board, Bradley's real estate broker license was permanently revoked. He was slapped with multiple felony charges for wire fraud and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. His wealthy investor clients abandoned him instantly, leaving him to face the criminal justice system entirely alone. He and LaToya were currently navigating a vicious, highly toxic bankruptcy proceeding, blaming each other for their mutual destitution. They had walked into my home believing they were untouchable apex predators. They had tried to manufacture my complete financial and physical desperation. Now, by their own greedy hands, they were living the exact nightmare they had tried to design for me. They were exhausted, broke, humiliated, and completely stripped of their autonomy. I closed the manila folder and handed it back to Marcus. I did not feel a rush of vindictive pleasure. I simply felt the quiet, profound satisfaction of a balanced equation. The structural integrity of the universe had been restored. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Close the file. I do not need any further updates on these individuals. Their lives are no longer my concern." A few days later, I was sitting in the executive suite drinking a cup of premium black coffee and reviewing the architectural blueprints for my new permanent residence. The building concierge came up to deliver my morning mail. Among the standard corporate correspondence and legal briefs was a thick, heavily wrinkled envelope. The return address was a cheap apartment complex on the industrial side of town. The handwriting was messy, desperate, and unmistakable. It was from Tyson. I set my coffee mug down on the glass table. I picked up the envelope, feeling the weight of the thick pages inside. I reached for the silver letter opener resting on the desk and sliced through the paper. I pulled out 4 pages of tightly packed, frantic handwriting. The paper was visibly warped by dried tear stains. I unfolded the first page. "Dad, I am so sorry. I have lost absolutely everything. My wife, my job, my home. My back is completely giving out on me at this construction site, and I can barely afford to eat. I know what I did was monstrous, but I was so desperate. Please, Dad, I am begging you. I just need one more chance to prove I can be a good son." I read the words. I saw the desperation bleeding through the blue ink. I felt the profound, crushing agony of a man who realized he had destroyed his own life. I did not feel anger. I did not feel pity. I did not feel a single ounce of paternal obligation. I smoothly folded the 4 pages back together. I did not bother reading the rest of his excuses or his desperate pleas for financial salvation. I turned my chair toward the heavy-duty paper shredder sitting next to the desk. I pressed the power button, listening to the sharp mechanical hum of the steel blades rotating to life. I dropped the thick stack of pages into the feeding slot. I watched as Tyson apologies, his tears, and his begging were pulled down and instantly sliced into hundreds of tiny, meaningless ribbons of paper. I dropped the envelope in right after it. I turned off the machine, picked up my coffee mug, and went back to reviewing my blueprints. The past was completely shredded. It was time to build something new. 6 months after I fed my son's desperate apology into a heavy-duty shredder, I finalized the purchase of my new permanent residence. It is a sprawling luxury penthouse on the 42nd floor of a high-rise I actually helped engineer over 2 decades ago. The space is a fortress of floor-to-ceiling glass, polished concrete, and brushed steel. It offers an unobstructed panoramic view of the entire city skyline. There are no spare bedrooms for ungrateful children to claim. There is no driveway for them to park their luxury vehicles. There is only pristine elevated silence and absolute untouchable security. But a man who spent his entire life building strong foundations does not simply retire to sit in an empty glass tower. I had a massive surplus of capital, specifically the $1.5 million from the cash sale of the old house, and I needed to channel it into something that carried true structural integrity. I called Vanessa Wright into my new home office. We did not discuss corporate debt or commercial real estate acquisitions. We drafted the foundational charter for a new philanthropic entity. I named it the Yolanda Miller Foundation. The mission directive was highly specific and deeply personal. The foundation was designed to provide elite legal representation, premium medical advocacy, and comprehensive post-operative care funding for elderly patients who have been abandoned by their families. I wanted to build an impenetrable safety net for the men and women who wake up in cold hospital rooms to find empty chairs beside their beds. I wanted to ensure that no vulnerable senior citizen in this city would ever be bullied, manipulated, or legally erased by greedy relatives trying to accelerate their inheritance. To run the operational side of the foundation, I did not hire a corporate executive. I hired a deeply compassionate professional who understood the exact nature of the problem. I had Vanessa track down Nurse Rachel, the young woman from the cardiac ward who had stood in my room on day 10. Her eyes filled with genuine sorrow as she handed me that state-funded nursing home pamphlet. I invited Rachel up to the penthouse. When she stepped off the private elevator, she was visibly stunned by the sheer magnitude of the space, clearly trying to reconcile the wealthy, commanding man standing before her with the frail, abandoned patient she had pitied months ago. I offered her a cup of premium coffee and slid a formal employment contract across the glass table. I asked her to leave the grueling hospital shifts behind and become the executive director of patient advocacy for the Yolanda Miller Foundation. I offered her double her current salary, full benefits, and an unlimited operational budget to hire social workers and elder care attorneys. Rachel read the contract, her hands shaking slightly. She looked up at me, tears brimming in her eyes, and asked why I had chosen her. I told her the absolute truth. I told her that on the darkest day of my life, when my own flesh and blood threw me to the wolves, she was the only person who treated me with basic human dignity. She signed the contract right then and there. With the foundation officially launched and operating flawlessly, I found myself settling into a profound restorative rhythm. On a crisp, bright Sunday afternoon, I decided to take a long walk through the sprawling botanical gardens situated just a few blocks from my high-rise. The physical pain in my chest was completely gone. The surgical wires had fused perfectly with my sternum, and my cardiovascular health was stronger than it had been in a decade. I walked with a brisk, steady, confident stride, breathing in the fresh air without a single ounce of hesitation. The park was alive with vibrant, joyful energy. I strolled along the paved pathways, observing the people around me. I saw young African-American couples pushing strollers, their faces glowing with exhaustion and fierce protective love. I saw extended families gathered around picnic tables, grilling food, playing loud music, and laughing together with a deep, effortless connection. I watched a young man carefully helping his elderly father navigate a slight incline on the walking path, holding the older man's elbow with unwavering patience and profound respect. Looking at them, I did not feel a trace of bitterness or longing for the family I had dismantled. Instead, I felt a deep, resonant clarity. I finally understood the true, unvarnished definition of family. Family is not simply a biological accident. Blood does not automatically guarantee loyalty, and a shared last name does not equate to genuine respect. Family is an active, daily choice. It is the conscious decision to show up, to be present, and to honor the sacrifices of the people who paved the way for your success. Tyson and LaToya were never truly my family. They were parasites feeding off the resources Yolanda and I had generated. They viewed my love as a weakness to be exploited and my wealth as a prize to be captured. Cutting them out of my life was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of vital self-preservation. I stopped by a tranquil koi pond in the center of the gardens and sat down on a wooden bench. A little boy, maybe 4 or 5 years old, accidentally kicked his brightly colored soccer ball directly toward my feet. I stopped it smoothly with the toe of my shoe. The boy ran up suddenly, shy, hiding behind his hands. I smiled, picked up the ball, and tossed it gently back to him. His grandfather, a man who looked to be exactly my age, walked over and offered a warm, appreciative nod. "Beautiful day to be alive, brother," the man said, his voice rich and friendly. "It is the best day of my life," I replied, and I meant every single syllable. I watched them walk away to rejoin their family, feeling a profound, unshakable peace settling deeply into my bones. I had survived the surgery, I had survived the betrayal, and I had emerged entirely victorious. As the late afternoon sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and bruised purple, I returned to my penthouse. I walked across the polished concrete floor and stood directly in front of the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. I looked out over the sprawling, illuminated grid of the city. I could clearly see the distinct geometric silhouettes of the commercial high-rises I had engineered decades ago. They stood tall, rigid, and completely unbothered by the shifting winds anchored deeply into the bedrock of the earth. I thought about Tyson pouring concrete for a non-union crew to pay off his bookies. I thought about LaToya folding cheap shirts in a strip mall to survive. I thought about Bradley facing a judge and Heather dodging federal agents. They had tried to collapse my life, but their foundational engineering was pathetic, arrogant, and structurally unsound. I placed my hands in the pockets of my tailored trousers, staring at the glittering lights of the metropolis I helped construct. Never confuse an old man's silence for ignorance. We spent a lifetime building this world. It only takes us a second to dismantle yours. Did you enjoy my story? Let me know which city you are watching from down in the comments section. If you found satisfaction in this story of reclaiming dignity and setting boundaries, please consider supporting the channel by hitting the like button, subscribing, and sending a super thanks. Your sweet support allows me to keep sharing these powerful life stories. There are many more incredible stories waiting for you on the screen right now. I will see you in the next video, always with love and respect. Another profound lesson from this experience is that establishing firm boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but an act of essential self-preservation. Society often conditions us to believe that blood ties demand infinite forgiveness and unconditional access to our lives. However, tolerating abuse simply because it comes from relatives only breeds further disrespect. True peace is found the moment you realize your well-being is vastly more important than maintaining the illusion of a perfect family. Reclaiming your power sometimes means being willing to walk away entirely and building a new community based on mutual respect rather than entitlement. If this story inspired you to protect your own peace and set healthy boundaries, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below.